You wake beside the riverbank, the air heavy with the smell of water that has been moving all night. It is not a fast current, not the rush of a mountain stream, but the slow, deliberate slide of a river that has seen too many mornings to care about this one in particular. The mud beneath your elbow is cool, damp, and clings to your skin in the way that only river mud does, reluctant to let go, even when you lift your arm. Somewhere to your right, there is the sound of chewing. It is steady, wet, and unbothered. You do not look at first. The sound is part of the place, like the occasional plop of a fish breaking the surface or the faint hiss of reeds when the wind changes its mind. You keep your eyes on the water, watching how the early light tries to turn the ripples gold, but never quite manages it. When you do turn your head, the cow is there. She is standing just far enough away to make you wonder if she's been there all along. Her hide is pale in the morning light, dappled in places where the shadows from the reeds cross her body. Her horns catch the sun and hold it, warm and faintly glowing. She does not look at you directly, not yet. She keeps her head low, tearing the grass with a sound that is somehow both soft and final. You notice that the grass here is a deep, almost bluish green, thick with dew. It smells faintly sweet, and under that sweetness is the rich, dark scent of the soil itself. Somewhere far downstream, a bird calls one sharp note that cuts through the stillness before dissolving into the distance. Historians still argue whether the rivers of this region once ran closer to the cities, or whether the cities moved toward the rivers over centuries of quiet expansion. Either way, the river here seems older than any road you've walked. It carries silt and forgotten seeds, drifting past without announcing their origin. You press your palm into the earth, feeling the small, cold stones mixed into the soil. The bank curves gently here, making a pocket where the water eddies lazily before moving on. The cow lifts her head now, just slightly, and chews while looking somewhere over your shoulder. You follow her gaze, but see nothing, just the gray-green blur of trees lining the far side. There is a fringe of water plants along the edge, their long stems swaying in a rhythm that belongs to neither wind nor current. A dragonfly hovers above them, its wings catching tiny pieces of sunlight and scattering them again. In the slow, quiet, you realize your breathing has matched the pace of the river. Somewhere in the distance, there is the muffled sound of something wooden knocking against stone. It could be a boat, though you see no one. The sound fades, leaving you with the low hum of insects waking in the grass. The cow takes a step closer. Her hooves press into the wet soil with a weight you can feel through the ground. She lowers her head again, grazing near your knee, and the warmth of her breath drifts over you for just a moment before it's gone. Above, the sky is pale, almost colorless, as though it hasn't yet decided what kind of day it will be. A thin line of mist clings to the far bank, slow to lift. You lean back on your elbows, the coolness of the mud seeping into you again, and watch the river carry the morning away. You try to remember the nymph's name. It should come easily, a name like a drop of clear water, or the first green shoot in spring. But it hovers at the edge of thought, refusing to land. You know it's there, the way you know a dream still exists when you wake, even as it slips away. The cow is still nearby, head down, her jaw moving in that slow, steady rhythm. When she glances toward you, something in her eyes makes you pause. They are large, dark, and far too knowing for a creature that should be thinking only of grass and flies. It is like looking at a face you have seen before but can't place a feeling that grows heavier the longer you try to chase it. A breeze comes from the river, carrying the smell of wet clay and the faint metallic tang of water that has passed over stones for too long to count. Somewhere downstream, a splash startles a group of small birds from the reeds. Their wings flutter in a burst of pale brown and gray, then settle again. Historians still argue whether the story began here at all. Some say the nymph was from a far-off valley, brought to this place by circumstances no one fully remembers. Others insist the river itself was her home, that she had always been part of its quiet currents and shaded banks. Either way, the details are lost or perhaps ignored. You pick at the grass beside you, the blades cool and wet in your fingers. Each one bends and springs back with a kind of stubborn life. The cow shifts her weight, her hooves making a sucking sound in the damp soil. She flicks her tail, swatting at a fly that had lingered too long. Overhead, the branches of a willow hang low, their leaves swaying in the light wind. You watch one long strand dip into the river and lift again, leaving a circle of ripples that spreads outward until the surface is calm once more. You close your eyes for a moment, as though that might help the name come back. You try sounds first, soft vowels, round consonants, but they dissolve before you can hold them. You try to remember her voice, the way she might have spoken, but the tone is too faint to catch. All that remains is a sense of gentleness, wrapped in something unshakably distant. A herdsman passes along the far bank, leading two smaller cows toward the meadow. He does not look at you. He does not look at this cow either, though she watches him for a long moment. The man disappears behind the reeds, and the quiet folds itself back over the river. The cow steps closer still, her shadow falling across your hands. Her hide smells faintly of grass, dust, and the warmth of sun that has not yet reached its height. You study the curve of her neck, the faint line of darker hair along her spine. She pauses, looking at you again with that same unnerving familiarity. The nymph's name is still lost, but you can almost feel its shape, something that might once have been sung in the open air, something the river could have carried without effort. It rests just out of reach, like a leaf caught on the far side of the current. The breeze shifts, bringing the smell of wild thyme from somewhere upriver. The scent blends with the river's dampness, settling over the bank in a thin, invisible layer. You take a slow breath, letting it fill you, and the world narrows to the cow, the grass, and the unspoken memory of a name. You picture a palace somewhere far off, not because you have seen it, but because the morning light makes metal thoughts gleam. You imagine chambers of cool stone where sandals whisper and bracelets sound like small bells against a wrist. In your mind, the air is thick with the scent of stored myrtle and old smoke, and the walls hold a hush that comes from being obeyed for a very long time. If a queen lives there, she is not in a hurry. Queens in stories never are. Their patience is the kind that makes others restless. You do not try to climb to this place. You let it hang above the day the way a cloud sometimes claims a whole peak and refuses to move. You lie near the river and think about the way power prefers distance. From far away, it looks simple and bright. From far away, it feels like a single idea. Near the ground, near the water, the idea loosens, separates, and becomes reeds, dragonflies, hoofprints, and the slow work of chewing. The cow lifts her head and stares toward your imagined palace as if she can see it. Perhaps she can. Her eyes are polished pools that hold a bitterer kind of memory than yours, a memory that presses outward but never spills. The wind slides a strand of hair along her neck. She flicks an ear. A fly, insulted, moves on. You remember something steadier than rumor. Girls once ran races for the queen whose name you do not speak too loudly here. They ran at a famous sanctuary where a broad river is not the only thing that moves at Olympia, where men also run for thunder. Girls ran for the one who wears the diadem. The prize was a garland and a length of woven cloth called a peplos, and the track was shortened because small steps still count. This is a simple, solid piece of the world. Feet against earth, breath like bellows, a finish line no one can argue with. Mainstream historical fact. Between the reeds, a frog speaks in a single, rude syllable, and then refuses to explain himself. The sound breaks the quiet exactly enough. You look down and see where the river, greedy as always, has been eating the bank grain by grain. Water makes its own arguments and never bothers to repeat them. The palace in your mind drifts a little closer. In the great room, you imagine a chair that is nearly a throne, but not quite, because the difference matters to people who care about differences. On its arm, a small bird sits, a gray, ordinary thing with a twist in its voice. In one old tale, the bird was not always a bird. It began as a weather bearer with a sly plan, a cuckoo blown in by cold rain to shiver on the goddess's lap until she softened. People still leave little carvings of that bird in some places, just to remind the air that even a queen once listened to something small, quirky or fringe tidbit. You consider the titles that follow such a queen: of marriage, of order, of the lawful bed, and whispered by poets when they want the line to gleam cow-eye. The epithet is not unkind here by the river. The cow's eyes are steady and deep. The name is a kind of praise for watchfulness that does not blink when others do. Still, you turn the phrase over, feeling its weight. The cow grazes again, unimpressed by words which she cannot chew. A dragonfly settles on your knee. Its wings are panes of stained air. They tremble once, twice, and then lie perfectly still. You become a landing place for a moment. The river keeps moving in case you forget how. Scholars still argue whether the queen came first to one shore or another, whether her oldest house rose from the island of wide reeds or the city of many wells, whether the cow in her name is an ancient shadow from fields older than any clear temple stone. The fragments do not agree. The clay sherds lean one way, the songs lean another. The uncertainty does not trouble the morning. It only makes the grass seem taller. Scholarly uncertainty. In the far field, you can almost hear the thin slap of sandals. You imagine the girls again, hair-bound, tunics shortened for running, eyes narrowed at the curve of the track. A woman with a staff calls for silence. A hand drops. The line breaks into moving parts. Dust rises. Arms pump. Whoever wins will bring her household a little more pride at supper, and the peplos will hang for a while, where light can find it. It is a quiet festival in your mind, with bread that tastes of anise and a simple stew cooling in a wide bowl. Back in the palace that is not here, the queen considers a garland left to wilt on a stand. She is not cruel in your imagining. She is exact. Exactness can look like cruelty from below, just as clouds can look like mountains from far away. She remembers slights precisely. She also forgets reasons with the same precision, laying them on the shelf of dusted causes and leaving them there until the names fade from the tags. You picture an entire chamber devoted to reasons once sharpened like needles, and now dull as buttons in a jar. The cow noses your forearm, then pulls back, surprised by the warmth of your skin. You rub the ridge where horn meets hair. It is smooth as river rock. The animal sighs, a sound like air leaving a bellows. Across the water, reeds bend at the same time and in the same way, as if an invisible hand had stroked them. You think of the queen's other treasures, peacocks with tails like fallen twilight, a chariot with fittings that catch the sun and throw it back, a procession of women who know how to walk so their steps make only the sound of agreement. None of this arrives at the river. It stays where it belongs, far off, sitting in the cool of well-cut rooms. The day warms the mud around your ankles. The palace lifts, quietly, into the upper air of thought, becoming again the kind of place that floats, because it must. A herdsman appears on the near bank, sees you, sees the cow, and decides to be part of neither. He turns, chooses a path lined with thistle, and goes. A grasshopper climbs your sleeve and finds nothing of interest there. The dragonfly leaves without saying goodbye to your knee. You decide not to summon the queen with prayer or offering. You have only river water, a strip of bark, a few broken reeds, and those are best left to their own business. If a palace wants to be far, let it be far. If a cow wants to remember something she cannot speak, let her graze. You place your palm flat on the ground until the earth's faint heartbeat becomes almost audible. The day, busy in 1,000 small and lawful ways, continues. The cow has been watching you for some time now, not staring that would be too forward for her kind, but letting her gaze rest on you in a way that feels deliberate. Her eyes are wide and dark, shaped more like a person's than you expect, with the sort of depth that can hold something unspoken. When she blinks, it is slow, like the closing of a book you are almost finished reading. The grass around her is cropped short in patches where she has already passed, the soil beneath showing through in small, irregular shapes. A fly circles her head and lands near the soft curve below her ear. She twitches the skin there without moving the rest of her face, and the fly lifts again, offended. You wonder when you first noticed that this cow was not entirely a cow. Perhaps it was the way she shifted her weight, as if trying to stand the way a person would. Perhaps it was the glance that lingered too long, not in animal curiosity, but in something heavier, like recognition. The thought settles into you without urgency. You let it be. Historians still argue whether the epithet cow-eyed was always meant as praise. In certain regions, wide, calm eyes were a mark of beauty, especially in women. They spoke of patience, dignity, and a kind of strength that didn't require movement. In other places, the phrase might have carried a hint of mockery, though the stories that survive tend to smooth away such edges. Here by the river, The name feels unsharpened, simply a description of what is plainly true. Mainstream historical fact. You lean forward and rest your forearms on your knees. The cow mirrors you in her own way, lowering her head as though in quiet conversation. She pulls up another mouthful of grass and chews with the slow, grinding motion of someone who has all the time she will ever need. From the corner of your eye, you notice a water beetle skating across the river's surface, tracing small arcs that catch the sunlight. The ripples spread until they touch a patch of lilies along the bank, making them sway gently. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you recall a fringe detail you once overheard. In one forgotten version of the story, the cow, the nymph, was not transformed in anger at all. She had asked for the change herself, seeking to escape a situation whose details are no longer remembered. The telling of it is rare, and those who do remember it often laugh as if it couldn't be true. But the image lingers, a choice made for quiet instead of drama. A life exchanged for grazing and sky. Quirky or fringe tidbit. The cow flicks her tail again, brushing away another persistent fly. The sound is small but firm, like a broom sweeping dust from a stone floor. You think about what it would mean to forget the reason behind an action so large. The transformation is remembered, but the cause, perhaps not. Scholars still argue whether such gaps in the myths are the result of deliberate omission or simple neglect. Was the reason deemed unworthy of retelling, or did it vanish the way a footprint disappears in loose sand? No one can say for certain. Scholarly uncertainty. You reach out and touch her shoulder. The hide is warm and alive beneath your hand, the hair short and smooth. She pauses in her chewing but doesn't move away. Somewhere far off, a bird begins a song that sounds almost like a question, then stops before an answer comes. The river goes on flowing, patient as ever. The light has shifted just enough to make the water's surface gleam. The cow breathes out, and her breath joins the air around you, as though it has always been there. The mountains keep their own counsel. You see them from the river meadow as a soft blue wall, the kind that looks closer in morning and farther by noon. Shadows lie in the hollows like folded cloth, and the highest ridges wear a thin scrap of cloud that won't be persuaded to leave. You don't go to them. You let them lean over you as a roof made of distance. The cow lifts her head long enough to consider the same view, then returns to grass. Mountains are not edible. You try to name what the shade feels like when it comes off stone that large. It isn't cool exactly. It's a quiet that slides along the ground, collecting in the dips and running off slowly, as if silence were another kind of water. The reeds take it up. Your breath falls into step with it. Even the flies argue more softly. People have been pointing at that tallest shoulder of the world for a very long time. In the stories of this place, the high crown where clouds sit is the household of gods, a city without markets, a court without dust. There were sanctuaries for the thunder-bearer down on the plain too, at the foot where the mountain's shadow spills, and pilgrims walked out to offer the simple things that speak clearly: oil, grain, the smoke of a small fire. Mainstream historical fact. You picture a row of votive cups aligned like patient thoughts. Someone once carried them carefully in a basket. Someone wiped dust from their rims with a thick thumb and did not huff at the work. A breeze crosses the meadow and the cow's hide shivers in a delicate ripple, as if the wind had combed her with invisible fingers. She turns her head toward the mountains again and chews, unimpressed by their temples and courts. The sound of her jaw is rural and sure, a small answer to an enormous question. Out by the stones where the ground lifts, you notice thyme growing in tight cushions. When you crush a sprig between your fingers, the smell is dry and clean, like sunlight made into a taste. Bees arrive in their ordinary glory, not to be admired, but because they have work to do. They're murmur layers under the long hush that walks downhill from the peaks. You remember a small, odd saying a herdsman once shared, and then insisted you forget. On mornings when the crown of the mountain wears two separate hats of cloud, someone up there is sulking, and you should count your sheep twice. He smiled with only one side of his mouth when he said the word someone, as if names could bruise. It is a fringe scrap of weather wisdom with no scripture to stand on, but it lives here the way burrs live in wool, lightly, stubbornly, hard to shake free. Quirky or fringe tidbit. A raven passes overhead, wings cutting the light in slow strokes. The bird does not call. It writes a silent line across the day and keeps flying toward the slopes, toward broken stone and cold springs, toward nest sites that have considered more mornings than you have breath for. You follow it with your eyes until the angle of the sky takes it away. Scholars still argue which Olympus some of the old singers meant when they oiled their throats and made the air obey them. The name was not married to one mountain alone. There were other peaks that wore it like cousins wearing the same old coat. Did the poets mean this tall blue spine with its weather for a crown, or a nearer ridge with an easier path and a village at its feet? The evidence gathers itself into stacks and refuses to become a single book. Scholarly uncertainty. You find that this failure to settle anything does not disturb the grass. A grasshopper lands on your knee. It behaves like a badly made hinge, clicking without opening anything. The cow snorts softly, and a damp circle darkens the dust by her forefoot. You consider how far a shadow travels in a day. If you started walking now, you could carry the shade with you for a while, as a traveler wears his cloak. But the river holds you, a low cord of water tied loosely around your ankle. You sip from your palm and the taste is the same as always. A little iron, a little earth, the faint chill a patient current keeps hidden. On the far bank, a thin track climbs toward the foothills. Two goats choose it without consultation. Their bells make a sound you could spend the rest of your life listening to and never be finished with. The mountain's notch lines up with the sun, and the meadow shifts color by a shade you wouldn't notice indoors. Reeds move as a group. Somewhere in the shallows, a frog has decided it is important to count to one over and over again. You allow him this victory. You think of houses that face the great ridge and build their lives to its timing. Washing hung when the shadow retreats. Bread baked before it returns. Weddings arranged for a day when the hat of cloud is small and bright. You think of how people fix their calendars to stone and then claim the stone spoke first. Perhaps it did. You press your hand to the ground and feel those old decisions in the warmth that rises through your skin. The cow drifts 2 steps, then a third, and finds a patch of clover, which changes her breathing slightly with its sweetness. She closes her eyes while chewing. It looks like prayer, but it isn't. It is simply trust in the good behavior of plants. Someone has set a small heap of pebbles at the base of a willow here, the beginning of a shrine or the end of one. It's hard to say. Among them, you notice a piece of pale glass worn round by water. You turn it in your fingers. It pretends to be a gem and does a fair job of it in this light. You leave it where you found it, because the mountain will not be bought with a toy. It does not even require your respect, only your agreement to exist at the same time. Above, the highest ridge lets go of one strand of mist and gathers another, the way an old woman switches threads without stopping her work. You feel the day widen. The river makes its case for continuity by continuing. You offer it nothing, and it thanks you by being enough. You listen to the mountain with your skin, which is how people did it before they had better tools for not listening. What you hear is this: great things do not always explain themselves. The shadow moves. The bee returns to time. The cow's jaw keeps the ordinary covenant of pasture. And you, a small witness, soften at the edges until you fit the bowl of the meadow as neatly as water fits the bend in the bank. The cow moves into a patch of shadow, and the sound of her chewing becomes the loudest thing in the morning. It is not hurried chewing. Each mouthful is rolled, pressed, and softened before she swallows, then taken again. Her ears tilt now and then toward a fly or toward you, but her jaw never stops its work. It is the rhythm of someone certain that there will always be more grass. You watch the muscles of her cheek move under the hide a slow, circular strength. Each bite pulls the scent of the meadow into the air. Crushed green stems, faint sweetness, and the warmer smell of earth where the grass has been tugged up to its roots. A bee wanders past your ear and dips low over the cow's back before disappearing toward the reeds. People have been keeping cattle in these low river valleys since the first stones were stacked into huts. Not far from here, the remains of ancient enclosures have been found, lines of post holes darkened in the soil, traces of packed earth where hooves once pressed. Mainstream historical fact. You picture those early pens filled with the same patient chewing, the same quiet exchange between animal and ground. The cow shifts one step sideways to a thicker patch. The grass bends under her muzzle, each stalk pulled with a small tearing sound you've already come to expect. She blinks once at you and then closes her eyes, still chewing, as though the flavor of the mouthful is enough to keep her occupied. There is an odd detail you once overheard from a shepherd, more a superstition than a fact. He swore that a cow who eats in steady circles, always turning the same way as she grazes, will bring the household either great fortune or slow disaster, depending on whether she begins clockwise or counterclockwise. He never said which direction was which, perhaps because he liked the power of leaving people unsure. Quirky or fringe tidbit. You glance to see which way this cow is turning. She is not turning at all. She takes 2 bites forward, one to the left, then pauses, as if she too distrusts such neat predictions. The sunlight is higher now, pushing the shadows into smaller shapes. The cow's hide gleams along her back, and when she exhales, you feel the faint warmth of it reach you. Her tail swings once, brushing the air. Historians still argue whether grazing patterns in antiquity were managed with strict rotation or left to the animal's own choice. Some claim that fields were divided in time so the grass had seasons to recover. Others suggest that in smaller communities, herds roamed where they liked, the land simply bearing it until the season changed. Scholarly uncertainty. The meadow here seems generous enough not to mind. A grasshopper lands on your forearm, so light you almost miss it. It flexes its back legs, considers, and leaves without haste. The river makes its low sound against the bank, a sound that has no edge to it. The cow lowers her head again, her jaw moving in slow loops. You match your breathing to it without meaning to. The world reduces itself to her chewing, the faint hiss of reeds, and the smell of grass becoming something else inside her. The laurel tree stands a little apart from the riverbank, as if it has been keeping its own counsel for centuries. Its bark is pale and smooth, marked only by the fine cracks time insists upon. The leaves, narrow and glossy, turn this way and that in the breeze, showing flashes of lighter green underneath. The air around it smells faintly sharp, the way laurel always does, as though it has just been cut for a wreath. You sit beneath it and feel the way its shadow shifts across your shoulders. The branches arch above like the ribs of a roof, but one that lets in small coins of sunlight. A grasshopper clings to the trunk, unmoving, its body matching the color of the bark so well it might be part of the tree itself. Laurel has been twined into the life of these lands for longer than any one story can explain. Crowns for victors, garlands for poets, leaves scattered on the hearth at certain festivals, each used leaving a faint trace in memory. Mainstream historical fact. The smell has been called both holy and unsettling, as though the tree is always halfway between the world of people and the place where gods keep their gardens. The cow stands nearby, chewing in her steady way, but every now and then she lifts her head toward the tree, watching the leaves stir. You wonder if she recognizes it. Perhaps the scent stirs something she cannot name. A fringe detail drifts into your mind. An old fisherman once told you, with complete seriousness, that laurel trees will sometimes murmur if you rest your head against their trunks at night. He claimed the sound was not words, exactly, but more like a memory being retold to itself. He said it was best to listen only briefly, lest you hear something you were never meant to know. Quirky or fringe tidbit. The breeze freshens, moving through the leaves in a way that does sound almost like a whisper. The cow flicks her ear and steps closer to the shade. Her shadow joins yours on the ground, a soft outline beside your own. Scholars still argue whether certain groves of laurel were planted intentionally near sacred springs, or whether the trees simply favored the damp ground that people later found holy. Some point to writings that speak of laurel as a deliberate guardian of such places. Others insist it was mere accident, later woven into ritual. Scholarly uncertainty. A leaf breaks loose above you, drifting down in a slow, turning fall. It lands in the grass between you and the cow. She lowers her head as though to sniff it, but then ignores it entirely. You pick it up and turn it in your fingers, feeling the smooth, leathery surface, the faint scent that clings to your skin. The river keeps on moving, the same steady voice it's had all morning. The laurel's shadow shortens, then lengthens again as the day leans toward its next hour. You stay where you are, the tree, the cow, and the water all keeping their quiet company. The river smells of warm clay, the kind that has been soaking in sun for days but still keeps a coolness deep inside. You kneel at the edge, letting your hands sink into the wet bank until your fingers meet the slick, fine silt below. It presses between them like soft wax. When you lift your palms, the water rinses them clean in thin, wavering ribbons. The surface shows you your own reflection, though it is blurred and broken by the faintest current. Above and behind your face, reeds stand like green spears, their tips quivering in the faintest wind. A pale yellow flower floats by, not drifting quickly, but as if it is perfectly content to take the long way. Rivers like this have always been the slow corridors of travel, even when no road could reach a place. Barges, fishing skiffs, and narrow reed boats have carried people and goods from one bend to another, their wakes folding into the banks where herons stalk the shallows. Mainstream historical fact. You imagine the quiet slap of a paddle, the smell of drying nets, the low calls between boatmen who know the river better than the land. The cow joins you at the edge, her muzzle lowering toward the water. She drinks in long pulls, each swallow making her throat move. When she lifts her head, droplets cling to the short hair around her mouth before falling back into the river. You see your reflection again, now with hers beside it, two faces sharing the same shimmering surface. A strange memory comes to you, though you are not sure it is your own. An old woman in a riverside village once claimed the river could remember every face that had ever looked into it. She said that sometimes, when the wind was still, you could see those old faces pass under your own like fish in deep water. She told it as if it were an ordinary fact, not something to marvel at, quirky or fringe tidbit. The air is rich here, filled with the scent of mud, water plants, and the faint mineral tang of stone. Somewhere nearby, a fish breaks the surface with a sound too quick to catch. Circles spread outward, brushing the reflection of the reeds before disappearing. Historians still argue whether the smaller channels that feed this river were shaped by human hands in antiquity or by floods and time alone. Some evidence points to deliberate embankments. Other traces suggest the work of water moving freely for centuries. Scholarly uncertainty. The river does not answer the question. It simply keeps flowing, holding both possibilities in the same current. You dip your fingers in again and let the water run down your wrists, cooling the skin. The cow steps back into the grass, chewing once more, her drinking finished. A dragonfly skims the surface, its shadow racing just beneath it. The day stretches onward. The clay holds its scent, and the river, in no hurry, carries both your faces somewhere you will not follow. You notice him without quite deciding to look. He is already there, as if the morning had been holding a place for him. He stands just beyond the sweep of the laurel's shade, in the neat border where sun begins. He does not announce himself. He is simply part of the landscape. Like a post that has stood too long to seem new, his staff leans against his shoulder at an angle that looks permanent. You rise halfway from the grass and then stop, because he is not doing anything that requires you to stand. His posture is all listening. He is tall in a way that trees approve of, broad in a way that banks admire for not crumbling. His hair is the color of straw pressed under a roof for a season. His beard holds small threads of gray like cobweb. His eyes, there are too many. Not a shocking number, not a sudden swarm, but more than you can count without being impolite. Some are half closed. Some open just enough to see the day's intentions. None of them blink in agreement with the others. He watches the cow first. His attention moves over her the way a slow wind moves over grain, not to disturb, only to see. The cow lifts her head, meets the gaze of one set of eyes, then another, then lowers her muzzle and returns to the work she understands best. A small, old truth arrives quietly. In painted pottery and carved stone from these coasts, the watchman with the many eyes appears again and again, a guardian set to patience. Sometimes the artists gave him a scatter of eyes on arms and chest. Sometimes they left him looking like any shepherd. The many implied by the way he stands with nothing between his attention and the task. Mainstream historical fact. The versions sit comfortably together, the way two stones can share the same patch of shade. He steps closer to the river, the staff tapping once against a root and falling silent. His sandals leave a simple pair of prints, no different from any other traveler's. Tarry. When he stops, The reeds accept his shadow without complaint. You realize that the space around him feels arranged, not tightened, not tense, but aligned to the fact of his watching. He looks at you now, and the effect is not uncomfortable. It is like standing in a doorway on a bright day and realizing the house is full of windows. The many eyes do not pry, they inventory. They count the way a shepherd counts, not to judge, but to be sure of what has been entrusted. One eye notes the bit of clay on your knee. Another attends to the dragonfly that has decided your shoulder is a landing place. Another studies the way the laurel leaves answer the breeze in small turns. You offer the simple greeting that belongs to riverbanks and fields. He returns it with a nod that seems to happen in chapters. The staff tilts and rests again, and he goes on keeping the day. A herdsman once told you a thing he swore was practical. Paint eyes on the prow of a boat, and the water will behave better under it. He had a shard, to prove it a piece of old clay, with a wide, bold pupil set in white. He said those eyes on ships weren't for decoration, they were for returning the river's gaze with good manners. If a boat can be watched and watching at once, he said, it stays awake and safe. You did not argue with him. Quirky or fringe tidbit. The watchman shifts his weight. The motion is so slight that a bird on a nearby branch does not bother to fly. He looks at the cow again. Two of his eyes seem to soften, if eyes can do that. The others go on with their own small tasks, counting gnats, tracking the mirror of the river, memorizing the angle of the sun on the horn. Scholars still argue whether the number of his eyes ever mattered. 100. Some songs claim with the confidence of round numbers. Others prefer all-seeing, which might mean 2 eyes that never tire, or 10, or simply the habit of not sleeping when asked to guard. Was he a walking wall of vigilance, or a metaphor with bare feet and a staff? The texts diverge, the images disagree, the fragments mutter among themselves. Scholarly uncertainty. The morning, for its part, holds both possibilities easily and spills neither. A breeze runs over the meadow, and the reeds bow as one. The cow turns so the wind combs her in the opposite direction. The watchman's cloak lifts, then settles, as if noting the rehearsal of an evening coolness. He does not smile, but something like approval moves through his attention when he sees how the cow has chosen the thicker patch of grass. You wonder what he eats, where he sleeps, whether he dreams in a room with shutters or under the open lid of night. He looks like someone who could sleep standing up, leaning by habit against a tree he trusts. You do not ask. Asking would be a kind of noise, and noise would bend the day into a shape it has not chosen. Downriver, a boat nose slides past the reeds. The rower glances toward shore, sees the watchman, and looks away again quickly, as if there is a courtesy that requires not staring at a man who cannot help but stare back. The painted eye on the prow, a fresh one, bright and round, seems to take its cue from the many smaller ones that stand on land. The current wrinkles, then smooths itself. The watchman kneels without ceremony, breaks a reed, and tests its strength between his fingers, as though he'd been thinking about that one particular reed since dawn. He ties it into a loop, then unties it, satisfied with something you do not learn. His hands are careful. They have the unremarkable grace of a person who does the same small work many times well. Birdsong unfolds and refolds in the trees across the water. An egret takes 3 reluctant steps, then stabs at a fish that is not there, then forgives the river for lying. The watchman sees all of this, and none of it troubles him. Seeing is his craft the way chewing is the cow's craft. Neither requires applause. You have the sense that if you walked away and returned next season, he would still be here. The grass grown, the river possibly a hand's width higher or lower, the staff polished another finger's breadth by use. There would be a new nick on the shaft from a stone that held its ground. There would be an old repair on the strap of his sandal, where a nail once failed and was forgiven. He raises one palm, as if to feel the height of the sun without looking up. A pair of his eyes turn to the laurel. Another pair turn to where a path begins, its argument with the hill. Another watches the cow's flank rise and fall in calm labor. This is work that does not hurry. This is duty that has forgotten how to call attention to itself. A fly lands on his cheek. One of the smaller eyes blinks by itself, once, as if to flick the fly away with a gesture too gentle to insult it. The fly leaves, disappointed by such good manners. You think about the uses of watchfulness in a world that moves mostly at the pace of plants. It prevents small losses from becoming large ones. It keeps reasons from wandering off, even if the reasons themselves grow thin. It does not heal, but it does keep the patient company. The watchman straightens. He does not speak. He does not need to. He is a fact in the meadow now, a post set in memory. The cow grazes. The river carries news no one reads. The laurel holds its smell of dignified sharpness. Your hands rest, and for the first time today you feel how the quiet has been watching you back. The rope looks softer than rope. It is a pale strand of twisted flax, the color of unbaked bread, with a faint sheen where fingers have handled it often. When you lift it, it has the quiet weight of something made from plants and patience. It smells lightly of clean dust, and the last memory of retting water, that river sourness long since rinsed away. You run it between forefinger and thumb and feel the tiny ridges where the fibers cross one another, each twist agreeing to the next. The watchman glances once and says nothing, which feels like permission. You lay the loop over your knee and smooth it with your palm. The line is not meant to rule anything. It is there to suggest. It is there to persuade the day to move in a straight line for a few steps. The cow lifts her head from the clover and regards the pale cord as if it were another kind of grass that has forgotten how to be eaten. Flax has lived long in these lands. In old fields by the rivers, people sowed the slender blue-blooming stalks and pulled them up by the roots when they were ready. They dried, redded, and combed the fibers. They spun thread on spindles and wove linen for garments and household cloth. From the same plant, stronger strands were twisted into cords and ropes good for boat work, for household bundles, for halters that would not bite the skin. Mainstream historical fact. You think of narrow rooms with looms leaning like patient animals, of hands that never stop turning, pinching, smoothing. The rope in your lap remembers those hands, even if you do not. You fold one end into a simple loop, the kind that knows how to let go when asked. The rope accepts the shape without argument. You stand, and the cow does not step away. She inclines her head as if to sniff the loop, then holds still. You pass the circle over her horn and along the curve of her face, under the warm thickness of the jaw, and settle it on her neck at a looseness that is more courtesy than control. A small superstition wanders in with the breeze, something a ferryman once told you on a day when the river sulked and refused to carry sound far. He swore that if you twist a new rope while humming a tune no one else knows, the rope will remember the tune and be gentler in your hands thereafter. He demonstrated with great seriousness, winding his own low melody into the strands, as if feeding a tame snake. He insisted the rope, when called by that tune, would slacken rather than snatch. You did not try to argue music into or out of plant fiber. You only listened. Quirky or fringe tidbit. The rope lies against the cow's hide, like a narrow river across a field. Her skin warms the flax. You test the give of it, and feel how the cord answers in small, even resistances, each twist taking its share of the pull. The watchman shifts his staff to the other shoulder with a motion that could be approval, or it could be weather. You turn the free end twice around your palm, and then think better of it. Instead, you take a soft turn around a willow branch, a courtesy to the tree and to your own fingers. Should the animal decide to move more quickly than thought, the knot you choose is not a knot like a soldier's or a sailor's. It is a simple tuck that knows how to behave. You pull and test. The rope holds its opinion gently. Scholars still argue how exactly the old images meant to show this moment. On painted vases and carved stones, the transformed one appears sometimes with a fillet around the horns, sometimes with a cord lightly draped, sometimes with no sign of tether at all, only a human beside her whose hand suggests guidance more than command. Did the storytellers imagine a halter, a ribbon, a symbol? The fragments do not agree, and the gaps between them are wider than any strand of flax. Scholarly uncertainty. You find that the cow's breathing is indifferent to iconography. You stroke the rope once more, the way one might pet a working dog before it sets itself to its task. The fibers have a dry kindness. Where your skin is slightly oiled from river, water, and meadow heat, the flax brightens, taking a faint gloss that darkens the twist without changing its nature. There is a small sound when flax rubs against hide, not a squeak, not a rasp, but a whisper of plant against animal that feels older than the day. You step, and she steps with you. Not far, not with drama. You lead her 3 paces toward the laurel, and then stop, because there is no reason to go anywhere else. The rope droops in a graceful line between your hand and the soft triangle of her throat. The watchman watches the line, then the hand, then the leaf shadows that land and pass on the cow's shoulder, as if the tree were trying on different thoughts. In the reeds, a hidden bird counts to 2, forgets 1, and starts again. The river folds itself around a submerged stone and smooths its face for the next passerby. Your thumb finds a slightly rougher place in the twist, where 2 fiber bundles met less perfectly than the others. You admire that honesty, craft that allows a small imperfection to show itself and be part of the strength. You think of other uses for such rope in such a morning: lashing a pair of poles to carry a basket more easily, tying the shutter of a low window against a stubborn wind, binding a broken handle until a better repair can be promised. Strong plant, willing hands, patient twist. This is the arithmetic of cordage, and it needs no chalk to prove itself. The cow shifts her weight and the rope angles, then settles, adjusting without complaint. You loosen it a finger width, not because she asks, but because you prefer that any asking never be needed. The loop sits where throat meets chest. Her breath moves under it like a bellows, slow and sure. You remember a small trick someone showed you years ago. A little olive oil rubbed into flax quiets it, keeps it from singing against wood on dry days. The word singing pleased you then. It pleases you now. You touch your fingertips to the inside of your wrist, the skin already carrying the meadow's faint sheen, and then pass them lightly over the rope. The cord takes the courtesy and grows even calmer. The trick has no great authority behind it. It belongs with the fairy. Man's hum in the cupboard of useful beliefs. The watchman shifts a step and rests the staff's end on a patch of bare earth, leaving a shallow circle there. He looks at the way your hand holds the line low, relaxed, inviting the animal to choose to agree. A pair of his eyes look out across the meadow, as though counting yellow flowers. Another pair memorize the exact tilt of your wrist so they can keep it for later without telling anyone. You stand like that for a while, which is to say, you give the rope and the morning time to understand each other. The laurel lets down one more leaf. The river adds a wrinkle to its conversation and removes it again. The cow's ear flicks, and the rope answers with the tiniest reply, a breath of movement that doesn't quite become motion. When you finally ease the loop free, the rope leaves a fleeting pale line in the hair where it lay, already disappearing as the cow lifts her head to a new patch of grass. You coil the cord loosely, never tight, never angry, and the coil makes a small, satisfied circle in your hand. You hang it on a low willow spur where sun and shade can consider it in turns. The cow returns to chewing, which is the pasture's best hymn. The watchman resumes the particular stillness that is his labor. The rope hangs, ready to remember the tune you did not hum, pliant as river talk, patient as the fields that gave it. And you sit again on the bank, fingers holding a faint dusting of flax, content with a tool that needed almost nothing from you to do almost all that was required. A shadow crosses the meadow, slow and large, yet without sound. You look up, half expecting a bird, but the sky is empty, except for a stretch of pale cloud. The shape that passed over you was already dissolving in the light. The cow lifts her head, blinking once at the brightness before returning to the grass. You know the sort of shadow. This is the kind cast by something higher than the mountain ridges, something that moves without touching the earth. In the old stories, such shadows belong to those who travel in forms the sky accepts without question. A drift of cloud can hide them. The sudden dimming of light can announce them. Some tales place the thunderer's presence as a real, physical crossing, a god moving in disguise, stepping over fields, letting his cloak brush the tops of trees. Others describe him as no more than a passing mood in the weather, a warm wind on one side of the meadow and a cool one on the other. Either way, people once looked up when the light changed, the way you just did. Mainstream historical fact. The air shifts now, not with wind, but with a weight you can't measure. It is like standing in a room where someone important has just entered. No noise, just the rearranging of attention. You glance toward the watchman, He hasn't moved, but one or two of his eyes are turned to the sky. A faint smell rides the air, something between the sweetness of hay after rain and the sharp bite of ozone before a storm. You taste it without meaning to. The cow's ears flick forward, then sideways, then forward again, as though weighing whether this change in the air is worth interrupting her meal. A story you once heard from an old goatherd comes to mind. He said that when the king of the sky passed overhead in any form, goats would pause and turn their heads as if counting something unseen. The goatherd claimed it wasn't reverence, it was recognition, like meeting a relative you'd only heard about in other people's stories, quirky or fringe tidbit. The light shifts again, the shadow thins, loses its edges, and becomes only brightness. The air returns to its usual summer weight. The cow sighs, a sound like air leaving a wineskin, and resumes chewing. Historians still argue whether such passings in the myths were based on actual atmospheric events or were purely poetic devices. Some point to records of odd weather brief eclipses, strange cloud shapes, sudden changes in light as the seed of these tales. Others insist they were narrative tools, a way to give a character's entrance the dignity of the sky's attention, scholarly uncertainty. The meadow, for its part, does not care. The watchman's gaze returns to the cow, his many eyes resuming their slow, separate observations. You notice that the grass seems a touch greener after the shadow passed, though you could be imagining it. You lie back on the bank for a moment, feeling the warmth return to your face. The river moves as it did before, ignoring whatever passed above. The cow tears another mouthful of grass. Whatever message the shadow carried, it is already fading into the folds of the day. The voices reach you before the men do, a low braid of sound slipping through reeds and sun. It is not argument, not quite song, not even conversation as townspeople conduct it. It is the field's version of speech words, spaced the way steps are spaced, with a pause for uneven ground and a longer pause for the view. You lift your head and see them on the far curve of the bank. Two herdsmen ambling along the water's edge, staffs over shoulders, sandals whitening with dust that refuses to be left behind. They do not stop when they notice you. They nod, the way people nod at weather. One raises two fingers in a greeting that includes the cow, the watchman, and the laurel, without showing favoritism. Their flock is elsewhere, you can tell, because their hands are loose. Only men traveling between tasks carry themselves like this, elastic with the relief of having recently counted correctly. They talk the way long acquaintances do, one voice taller, one voice a little nearer to the ground, both careful with laughter so as not to frighten off sense. The taller one is telling a story about a ewe who learned to lift the latch of a byre door with her tongue. He swears the latch was not simple. He demonstrates with his own mouth to the other man's disgusted delight. The shorter one replies with a tale of a ram that hated only one hat and would allow no man to wear it through the gate. The hat, you understand, belonged to a cousin who borrowed money and never forgot to remember it. Pastoral talk has always had this shape in these parts, a stew of weather, beasts, and human troubles boiled down until they taste alike. On old cups and in poems from the soft south, you can find shepherds trading verses while goats graze, each line a friendly brag or a challenge. Panpipes appear, and reeds get credit for more music than they likely deserve. A crook leans against a tree as if it has its own opinion. Mainstream historical fact. You can nearly hear the old measures under today's plain speech, as if the day had a chorus and these men remembered most of it. They pass within the smelling distance of time and nod again. The watchman answers with a stillness that counts as greeting when delivered by him. Your cow lifts her head for the courtesy and returns to chewing, which the herdsmen accept as praise for their stories. They lower their voices by a thumb's width, as if a creature with patient eyes might prefer modesty from her audience. The shorter man carries a small wicker riddle slung from his shoulder, not a riddle you must answer, but the kind that sifts curds when you want cheese to become cheese. He sets it down to show where a binding cracked in last winter's wet and how he mended it with a clever crisscross of bark fiber. The taller man pretends not to be impressed and then asks, after a decent interval, whether the repair squeals when it dries. They agree squealing is a sign of pride, not failure. He produces, from somewhere in his cloak, a heel of coarse bread and a wedge of fresh cheese wrapped in a cool leaf. The scent drifts across the water, milk sweet with the faintest breath of grass, salt only as much as a thumb can scatter. He breaks the bread with the clean twist of someone practiced. Without ceremony, he tosses a small piece toward you and another, carefully, toward the watchman, as if one should not presume to feed a man with so many eyes from too close a range. The watchman does not eat. You do, slowly, out of respect for how long mornings like this take to arrive. A fringe belief slips into the talk, the way a ripple slips under a reed. The taller herdsman swears that if you shape fresh curd, on a day when the river runs muddy, the cheese will remember the turbidity and crumble for the rest of its days. Water makes a map inside, he says, poking the air as though the curd could be consulted like a weather tablet. He adds that whistling while salting is unlucky unless you first whistled to the flock. Otherwise, the wind steals your flavor. The shorter man rolls his eyes and whistles for 3 heartbeats, loudly, to spite the rule and satisfy it at once. Quirky or fringe tidbit. They sit on a fallen trunk and let the subject soften into weather. The higher ridges have put on their noon blue, and the talk counts the colors without saying their names. There was frost late in spring. The goats took it personally. The time forgave. A boy in the next valley built a whistle from elder and can call a dog from sleep at 2 fields distance. A neighbor's daughter plaits her hair like a barley rope and can carry 2 pails without spilling. This seems relevant to grazing for reasons no one hurries to supply. You ask them, gently, about the tracks you saw on the far bank, the shallow cuts that looked like the beginnings of a path. They glance toward it in a practiced duet and shrug the same shrug 2 different ways. A path, the tall one says, is wherever feet agree for longer than a week. The short one adds, unless a lord says otherwise. They do not sound resentful. They sound like men who have learned that land sometimes belongs to whoever can afford the word belong. And scholars still argue how the sharing of pasture worked in the old seasons here, whether hills were divided by strict rites, marked with stones and oaths, or whether bands of herds moved by custom alone, wintering low and summering high because grandfathers had done so, and the grass nodded to the arrangement. Some inscriptions scold trespassers with expertly carved severity. Some poems float across boundaries as if borders were ideas that sheep decline to read. The evidence is a coat of many patches, and it warms and scratches in equal measure. Scholarly uncertainty. A fly lands on the taller man's nose, and he crosses his eyes at it until the shorter one laughs. The cow swivels an ear to acknowledge their manners. The watchman resets his staff's foot by the width of a grain of barley, which for him is practically dancing. They ask, in the end, the question all field people ask without seeming to, are you staying? It is not nosiness. It is inventory. You say you will be here a while, and try to make a while sound like a length of string that can be knotted to fit many tasks. They approve. One offers advice about where the meadow dips in a way that collects cold at night. The other explains which willow pours sap if you cut it wrong, and which pretends to bleed but is only being dramatic. They rise together, the way geese lift first an intention, then the legs remember. The taller man shoulders the mended riddle. The shorter adjusts the strap of a water skin that has known more seasons than his sandals. They nod a third time, because 3 is proper for farewells among people who expect to see one another again without making a plan. As they walk on, their talk resumes at the exact word where it paused, as if the day itself had been holding the place in the sentence while they spoke to you. Not that the moon cares whether you lamb on a Tuesday, the taller says. It cares about dogs barking, the shorter answers. And they both agree loudly enough to turn 2 sparrows into separate ideas. Their backs diminish along the path until they are 2 strokes of moving shade against the bank. You can still hear the rhythm of their words after you stop hearing words at all. It becomes part of the meadow's machinery. Cow, river, reed, laurel, watchman, and men who talk as if silence has let them borrow a cup of sugar and expects it back by dusk. You finish the last bite of bread, the crust hard and honest against your teeth. The cheese has set perfectly despite the clear river. It holds its shape without pry. The cow shifts to a new patch, and the rope you hung on the willow shakes once, submitting to the passing breeze like a polite thought. Somewhere upriver, a bell speaks 5 times for no particular reason. The meadow declines to argue with it. You settle back into the shade and let the herdsman's voices keep going in your head until they become the sound of bees. You notice how the horns take the sun and make a smaller, warmer light of their own. The curve begins in the dark hair at the base, rises in a calm arc, and ends in a point that has learned not to hurry. Up close, the surface is not smooth the way river pebbles are smooth. It is smooth like well-used wood, with tiny lines that remember each season of growth. You run your hand along the horn from base to tip, and the warmth gathered from the morning travels under your palm as if the sun had been stored there for exactly this exchange. The cow lowers her head a fraction, accepting the attention with the politeness of a creature that believes in grass more than compliments. A thin veil of dust softens the first gleam. When you pass your thumb across, a truer sheen shows itself, not showy, only honest, the color of pale honey under glass. Your fingers smell faintly now of animal, meadow, and the ghost of resin from the laurel, whose shade you keep borrowing. You pause at the tip where the horn closes to a small, hard secret. The cow breathes, and you feel the rhythm in your wrist where your hand meets her. You think about how people have admired and argued with horns since there were people to admire and argue. There are old reliefs and painted pots that show cattle with wreaths and fillets, horns marked for ceremony. At certain festivals in these lands, animals were led with garlands, sometimes even with their horns gilded thinly or capped in bright metal before being offered, a brightness meant to please the watching powers and the watching crowd alike. Mainstream historical fact. You picture thin leaf gold burnished over a curve like this one, catching fire where the sun struck and going quiet in the shade. You do not push that picture further. The meadow you are in prefers continuance to completion. The cow flicks her ear as if agreeing. You rub a little circle near the base of the horn with your knuckle and marvel at how the material answers not bone exactly, not wood, but a cousin to both in its patience. A fly decides to join the experiment, lands, and is ignored by everything that matters. A herdsman once shared a trick he wouldn't swear to in front of a magistrate, but would gladly pass along by a river, rub a fresh slice of wild onion on the horn before the heat of day, then smooth a breath of olive oil after. He swore the onion wakes the surface and the oil teaches it manners. Leaving a glow even a picky buyer can't resist when you drive cattle through market gates, he added, with a look that invited disbelief that horns polished on a waxing moon sell dearer than horns polished on a waning one. Quirky or fringe tidbit. You smile at the memory, and out of respect for both onion and moon, keep your hands to simple stroking. The watchman tilts one set of eyes to follow your hand's small journey. The others attend to reed, sky, and ant with their usual discipline. He says nothing, but his quiet seems to hold the opinion that careful touch is its own correct language. You take another slow pass along the horn. In the place where the surface is most even, your reflection appears in miniature, not a face so much as a bright thumbprint of yourself, moving when you move. Historians still argue about the old glitter on horns. How common were those gilded caps beyond the grand feasts, and what exactly some of the little metal sheaths in museum drawers once meant. A few see ritual everywhere and call every thin bronze sacral, while others suspect practical reinforcements, or even ornaments for processions that never met an altar's smoke. In the records, poems like to shine things up. The ground, when asked, sometimes shrugs. Scholarly uncertainty. The meadow, weighed against such debates, remains profoundly sure of time, flies, and chewing. You notice a faint notch halfway along the curve, not sharp, just a place where horn and world once misunderstood each other. A gatepost, perhaps, or the insistent lesson from another cow's point. You lay your finger there and feel how the flaw does not diminish the whole. If anything, it gives your hand a place to rest. The cow breathes through her nose, and you catch a whiff of warm grass, river, and something older that belongs to afternoon barns and the shade of threshing floors. There is a kind of soft sound when skin slides over horn, a whisper that is not in a hurry to be heard. You follow the arc again, patient as a whetstone. The sun puts a small blessing on each ridge your fingers cross. Nearby, the laurel flickers its leaves as if applauding in a language that refuses to make noise. You think of other uses people made from such curves when time asked them to be something else. Tips for tools, combs set with teeth that remembered the head they would later tame, powders scraped thin for talismans that promise strength to sore joints and uncertain hearts. You do not scrape. You only think, then let the thought float downriver with everything else that will not be needed today. When you straighten, the horn holds a clearer light than it did a few minutes ago. It is not the brilliance of parade metal. It is the quieter shine of a thing attended to. You wipe your palm on your knee and leave a pale streak of dust that looks like a map of a country no one will ever conquer because no one will ever try. The cow shifts her stance. Her shoulder leans almost imperceptibly into the space where your hand was, as if she has learned the idea of polishing and is willing to continue the lesson herself by rubbing against the day. You laugh in the smallest possible way, which is to say your breath shortens gently and then lengthens again. A breeze crosses, and a thin ribbon of cloud drifts over the sun for the length of a single thought. When the light returns full, the horn answers with a fresh, round gleam that seems less like a reflection and more like a memory of light deciding to stay. You find yourself smoothing the air where your hand no longer is, as people do when they are satisfied and would like to tell the world so without words. You consider how many mornings it would take to keep this surface like this. Not many, not few, just as many as there are, because work of this kind is a calendar that doesn't mind being turned. You imagine a child given the task with great ceremony and little supervision. You imagine the small, proud circles the child's hand would make, and the way an older hand would later widen and slow them. There is a path of sun on the river now, and for a moment the horn and the water seem to have agreed on a color. The watchman shifts his staff the width of one reed and allows two of his eyes to rest. The laurel lets down a leaf which the air refuses to let fall quickly. The cow returns to grass, newly equipped to answer light with light. You sit back and rest your hands in your lap. The smell of laurel, oil from your own skin, and sweet meadow rises and settles. The horn keeps shining without your help. You let it. The day is better at finishing small jobs than you are. You find the shrine by not looking for it. It sits a little back from the path, where the willow roots hook the bank and hold the earth as if cupping water. 3 flat stones make a low table. A fourth leans against them like a door that never quite shut. The edges are rounded by hands and weather, and the top bears the shallow dents of rain that always falls with small intentions. Someone once swept this place. You can tell by the way the ground keeps itself neat out of habit. On the stone lies a garland that used to be green. The leaves are now the color of dust lit from within. Their veins show as faint ribs, the stems brittle as spun sugar. Was it laurel? Olive? A little of both, perhaps, braided together by fingers that wanted the day to hold still for a breath. A few dried blossoms cling like memories that took root without permission. You touch nothing. You sit and let the garland go on finishing its long work of becoming lighter. There are other small things. A clay cup with the lip chipped on one side, turned upside down. 3 pebbles chosen for their smoothness and stacked with polite care. A pinch of ash that the wind couldn't be bothered to scatter. A twist of wool, gray as cloud, looped once around a twig and then forgotten by everyone except the twig. The cow wanders close, inhales the dustless air of the little altar, and decides this is not a place for chewing. She steps back, respectful the way animals sometimes are without instruction. You pour a little river water from your hand onto the stones. The dark spreads and then withdraws, leaving the surface cool and the smell of clean rock rising. You think about the everyday offerings of these lands, oil poured in a quiet circle, honey left where ants will find it and declare a festival. Little cakes baked with a thumbprint in the center, so even a hurried blessing can find where to land. People brought what they had. Figs, first wheat, a sliver of cheese from a breakfast that did not miss it. In sanctuaries, large and small, rural altars and city courtyards alike, such offerings were the grammar of gratitude, the ordinary speech of piety, mainstream historical fact. You feel how the gesture steadies the day, as if the act itself is a kind of plumb line. The watchman pauses at the edge of the clearing. Several of his eyes rest on the garland. Several more agree to watch the river without making a fuss. He does not step into the space. He leans his staff against a root and stands just outside, the way a doorframe stands politely at the edge of a room. You nod as though the shrine could accept the courtesy on his behalf. A small, odd thing you were once told returns, the way a shy animal will. An old basket maker swore that if you rotate a dried garland a finger's width each new moon, the shrine will keep listening his phrase and misfortune will pass by, assuming no one is home. He said the direction mattered less than the attention. He said shrines, like people, dislike being ignored. He kept the thumbnail long for this purpose, he claimed, so as not to bruise the leaves with too much finger. Whether he was serious or only teasing the day, you never learned. Quirky or fringe tidbit. You do not touch this garland. You give it attention instead, which might be the same thing done gently. The stones themselves are old but not grand. Fieldstone that has accepted a job title. One face shows faint scratchings that might be letters, or might be the play of a bored knife. A thin smear of the soft red earth rubs into the grooves as if to underline them. Ants cross the altar in a single line, functioning as the smallest procession imaginable. One ant hesitates at the edge of a petal, then chooses the long way around, obeying a rule you don't know. You let your palm rest on the top stone, feeling where the surface dips from years of cups set down, fingers drummed, ash brushed away, weather kneaded into shape. The cool moves into your hand as if the stone were offering exactly what it has and no more. You imagine the countless little vows made here and kept or not kept with equal humility. May the lambs survive the difficult night. May the child's fever go down. May the traveler return by the path he chose. May the queen remember or forget, whichever harms us less. Scholars still argue what some shrines like this once were. Were they boundary markers promoted to holiness by use, cairns that became altars because feet kept pausing there? Were they beetles, stones believed to house a presence, later dignified with Greek names and Greek habits? Were they the corners of older cults to river and hill, dressed after a fashion in new stories about palaces and thrones? Archaeologists draw cautious maps. Poets draw confident ones. The stones themselves remain busy being stones. Scholarly uncertainty. The uncertainty, like shade, makes the place cooler. A breeze lifts the brittle wreath and sets it whispering against the stone. The sound resembles paper rubbed between fingers, or the voice of an old garment folded and unfolded in a chest. The cow turns her head to listen and then goes back to the faith of grass. The watchman allows 2 eyes to close and 2 to open, a balanced act that feels like agreement. You set 3 fresh thyme sprigs on the altar, no ceremony, only the honesty of the smell. The leaves are still damp with meadow, and their green looks almost loud beside the pale garland. The moment they touch stone, the scent wakes, clean, a little sharp, with a sweetness that refuses to hurry. For an instant, you think the laurel answers with its own sharper breath, the 2 herbs acknowledging one another like neighbors who share a fence and a few old complaints. From somewhere beyond the willows, a bee arrives with the sound of a thought coming true. It circles the thyme once, twice, and then discovers the dried blossoms in the garland and the last thin thread of their promise. You watch it work. The idea that this is worship seems unnecessary. The idea that this is correct seems sufficient. You remember a woman who used to leave the first hair she combed out each morning at a shrine like this, a pinch of loose strands tucked under a pebble so that the day, she said, would remember not to tangle. She taught her daughters to do the same. The stone counts what it is given, she told you, and then it counts you. Whether the counting helped, none of their hair ever told you. Another small fringe custom, widely believed by exactly one household, and anyone they could make smile. The light leans, and the stones change color as if they had been waiting for this signal. The top darkens, the side grows pale. The garland becomes almost transparent around the edges where time is finishing its meal. You notice a single seed still held in a dry pod, patient as a kept promise. The wind considers carrying it away, then decides not to. You speak aloud, but only the kind of words that behave themselves. Names of simple things, a thank you without an object, the weather's description offered back to the weather. Your voice sounds as if it has been folded into this place for a long time and only now taken out and shaken. The watchman inclines his head once, to you or the shrine or the air between, and then returns to stillness. Across the river, a heron lifts from the shallows with the slow authority of a priest who refuses to be rushed. Its legs trail like loose brush, and its wings beat the air into a more attentive shape. You feel the altar notice this and approve, though the approval changes nothing except the quality of your breath for a few seconds. When you rise, you do so by degrees, so the ants can continue their procession without having to rewrite any laws. You set one of the smooth pebbles a finger's width straighter, which is the kind of improvement that pleases both you and no one else. You step back until you reach the border, where the shrine's quiet lets the meadow's noise resume its work. The cow comes to stand beside you, shoulder warm against your arm. In her eye, you see a reflection of the pale wreath, small and precise, as if the story and the creature were deciding to acknowledge one another politely. The river takes a long, careful breath. The laurel's leaves make their small coin flashes of green again. You leave the shrine the way you found it, which is to say, you leave it already remembering you. The stones cool a little more in the shade. The thyme grows quieter but does not forget how to smell. The garland continues its patient lesson in how color becomes air, and the day, having been offered almost nothing, returns almost everything in the only currency it understands: more light, more shadow, and a place to set them down. The bowl is older than the morning. You can tell by the way its rim holds the light, not sharply, not greedily, but with the practiced calm of something that has seen hands come and go. It is earthenware, thick enough to forgive clumsy fingers, thin enough to cool quickly when set in the shade. A faint spiral from the potter's wheel still circles the inside. Barely visible beneath the film, the milk leaves as it settles. You lower yourself to the ground, and the bowl sits between your knees, steady on a patch of flattened grass. The cow stands nearby, chewing her usual answer to every question. The milk has the color of linen left to dry beside a stream. It carries a warmth that hasn't made up its mind to leave the animal yet. When you tilt the bowl a little, the surface leans without breaking, and a slow line clings to the clay before sliding back. You breathe in and get the fields in your nose, not just sweetness, but also the faintest edge of hayloft dust, a whisper of hide, the suggestion of time drifting in from where the bees are industrious. The herdsmen who visited earlier return without announcement, as if they have been walking a circle too wide for you to see. One sets a second bowl down, this one with a chip the size of a fingernail missing from the lip. The chip makes a perfect place for a thumb when you pour. Without much talk, he tips the milk from a skin into the bowls, then lets the last rich threads wind out with a twist of his wrist. You watch the foam climb and sigh into flatness. Morning milk has been breakfast in these parts for longer than clear stories can count. Goat and sheep give most of it. Cows help where the land allows. Fresh milk, curdled with a touch of acid or a spoonful of yesterday's sour, strained through woven baskets or cloth. This is the grammar of dairy. From it come soft cheeses salted just enough to keep until market day, and thicker, spooned curds that stand in a bowl like a promise. In houses, urban and rural, clay pots and colanders speak of this routine. In scraps of text and picture, milking stools and pails and strainers step quietly through the margins. Mainstream historical fact. You picture a row of small clay strainers sunning on a wall, their holes neat as a flock's footprints. The men do not hurry. Hurrying bruises milk, they say without saying. One picks a floating gnat from the rim with a twig and flicks it away. Another uses the side of his wrist to sweep a pair of flies without touching the surface. They sit, they drink, they pass the bowl in a rhythm that feels like a lane shared by neighbors. When it comes to you, the clay is cool where your fingers rest, warm where the milk rides. You sip. The flavor is plain and complete, as if the meadow itself had been persuaded to speak softly for a moment. A small superstition, passed along as easily as the bowl, turns up in the conversation like a stone at the bottom of a stream you thought you knew. The shorter herdsman insists that if you whistle during milking, you invite a breeze into the teat and lose a day's cream. But if you hum a wordless hum, nothing proud. The cow lets down more willingly, and the foam forms a neat ring that promises fair weather. He demonstrates at a respectful distance, with a sound that could be bees or a mother telling a child not to worry. The taller man snorts, then admits he hums on cold mornings because cold makes stubbornness in everyone. Quirky or fringe tidbit. You tip the bowl and watch the milk's edge travel the spiral on the clay, following the potter's old groove as if to honor the first turning that made the vessel. Tiny bubbles collect along the line and then surrender to gravity one by one. The cowskin rope you hung earlier sways once in a draft you cannot feel. Somewhere, the watchman adjusts nothing with dedication. One of the men shows you the rennet bag he carries, a little stomach from a young animal, washed and salted, dried and kept, for when milk must choose to become something firmer. He cuts the thinnest sliver and drops it into a different bowl across his knees, explaining with a finger how curds gather from the edges inward, like a meeting called with no messenger. He is not teaching. He is remembering out loud. The other man produces a reed basket, its interior lined with a pattern of narrow slats darkened by years of whey, and says he will set a small cheese before the sun trades places with the first crickets. Historians still argue about how often the people of the cities drank milk fresh versus turning it immediately into safer shapes, curds salted, cheeses dried. Whether mixing with water or honey was common for those who could afford sweetness. Whether milk on the tongue was regarded as childish, rustic, or simply practical, depending on whose house you woke in. Inscriptions speak more readily of cheese than of milk. Poets save their honey for other gods. The fragments pull toward different kitchens. Scholarly uncertainty. The morning here seems content to let all those kitchens exist at once. A bee assigns itself to the rim of your bowl, takes a careful step, thinks better of it, and leaves for a flower that offers clearer terms. You lift the bowl again and take the kind of drink that asks nothing and receives everything. The milk sits well in you, not heavy, not light, just present. The cow, whose work you are borrowing, breathes a slow agreement and swings her tail once with the gravity of a priest's sleeve. The men pass you a wedge of yesterday's curd, crisscrossed from the basket. It breaks with a friendly crumble and smells of clean salt and faint grass. You eat it with the same small bites you would give to good news, not hurried, not ritualized, just respectful of the shape it has chosen to hold. A fly circles the bowl in an oracular way, describing slow figure eights that pretend to mean something. The shorter herdsman watches it and says gravely that when a fly dances twice around a bowl and leaves, you will have visitors before noon. If it dips a leg into the milk and stays to wash, the visitor will be a neighbor who wants to borrow a tool and to tell you why the tool is necessary. The fly, hearing itself appointed to such duties, departs without a farewell. Everyone nods, having been spared. On the far bank, a child appears and vanishes again, the way young figures do when sent to gather a parent from a task that shouldn't be interrupted yet. A dog barks exactly 3 times as if the number were in the law. The watchman allows one of his many eyes to follow a bubble traveling along the edge of the milk. The bubble pops at the right place, which is to say anywhere. The taller herdsman rinses his bowl with a little river water, swirls, pours it on the grass for the ground to drink. You copy him. The clay looks new again, the spiral bright with wet. He sets the bowl lip down on the packed earth and leaves it there to dry in a square of shade. Clay likes shade more than sun when it has been working. Someone taught you that, and you never had reason to disobey. You speak of small dairy matters now, which is to say, you make a list that doesn't pretend to be a list. Which cow carries her milk low and which high? Which prefers a gentle hand and which respects a firm one? How to keep a pail from smelling like yesterday? How to scald a cloth so it returns to work as if no work had ever touched it? The men answer in short, contented phrases, each sentence stroking the day in the direction its hair already lies. You think of markets where such milk will walk in other shapes, hard cheeses knocked with a knuckle to judge their mood, soft ones wrapped in leaves, tied with grass, carried in baskets that learn to be careful, skins with sour drinking for men who walk too long between shade and shade. You think of city courtyards where clay cups sweat on ledges and cats make a religion out of waiting. The cow breathes, and the milk in your memory breathes with her. The laurel leans a shade to see, then pretends it was only returning a leaf to its proper angle. The river sends a rumor of coolness through the reeds, and the rumor turns out to be true. When the bowls are empty, nobody notes the moment. The herdsmen stand as if remembering they have legs, shake their hands free of attention, and gather their simple tools. The smaller one tucks the rennet bag away like a private thought. The taller replaces the stopper in the milk skin with a twist its leather has known for years. Before they go, the shorter man pours a finger's worth of milk into his palm and flicks it onto the ground at the cow's feet. For the share she didn't ask for, he says, not to you. The cow blinks. The watchman's staff moves the breadth of a barley husk. You wipe the bowl with the clean part of your sleeve and set it where shade will finish what water began. The meadow resumes its ordinary sermon bees, keeping accounts with time. Reeds writing the same letter to the wind over and over. Mud making calm arguments to hooves. Your mouth holds a last coolness that isn't quite taste anymore. It feels like being agreed with. You place your palms flat on your knees and watch a take-flight thought settle again. Milk in an earthen bowl. Hands that know how to share. A cow that does not concern herself with ceremonies performed in her honor. The day nods. The bowl's dry. And time, satisfied with how quietly this came out, loosens its belt a notch and sits with you in the shade. Beyond the reeds, the meadow widens like a long breath you didn't know you were holding. You part the green spears and step through to where the ground turns soft gold and green at once. A woven carpet of grasses with thyme tucked into the warp. The smell rises before your foot lifts again. Clean, bright, a little peppery, like sunlight pretending to be a spice. Bees make a soft net over everything. A woven sound that holds the day up so it doesn't slump. The cow comes after you without being called, shouldering the reeds aside with the gentleness of something that knows it is stronger than most problems. The land here has a slow tilt, just enough for water to remember which way to go when the rains are in a persuasive mood. Low mounds wear cushions of thyme, and a few pale flowers that keep their purple like a secret. When you brush a sprig with your calf, the fragrance lifts and lingers behind you, as if the plant has decided to follow. The watchman remains where the laurel shades the bank, but the shape of his attention stretches across the meadow as surely as a shadow. You feel included and supervised in equal, comfortable parts. You pause to listen the way people used to listen before they learned more complicated ways to be distracted. The hive speech of bees runs under the thin saw of grasshoppers in the warm strips of light. Above them, larks burr a little thread of song into the sky and refuse to fetch it back down. The cow lowers her head, and the familiar, careful churn of her chewing becomes one more instrument in the orchestra. Rhythm section, pastoral edition. Long before people thought to name gods in the fields, thyme had a place in cooking pots and on wounds and under pillows. Later, it kept those places and gained others. In these lands, it flavored stews and fish. It traveled into bath water and onto coals where people hoped to sweeten the air. It even found its way into small cakes carried to doorways where thanks needed an aroma to lean on. In the words that survived, thyme's name sits close to courage and to smoke, both ideas that know how to lift. Mainstream historical fact. You strip a tiny spray between finger and thumb, let the oils wake, and then touch your wrist so the meadow's pulse remembers yours. The cow noses a thyme cushion, considers, then returns to thicker grass. Flowers are interesting, but grass is a promise she can keep. When she steps, a handful of bees adjust their route around her in a lazy, agreeable detour. One lands on your sleeve, tries the cloth for nectar, finds none, and leaves without filing a complaint. A fringe belief, offered to you once by a woman with hands stained green to the cuticles, floats back like thistledown. She swore that if you whisper the name of someone you miss into a thyme patch at noon, the plant will keep the name like a careful messenger and release it at dusk, carrying it on its scent to wherever the person is. She insisted this worked best if you spoke softly enough not to disturb the bees, because bees dislike errands that aren't theirs. You tried it once, and dusk did smell strongly of the person in question, though they were standing beside you at the time and had just baked bread, quirky or fringe tidbit. You kneel and press your palm into the thyme until it prints your skin with the plant's pattern. Tiny stems spring back when you lift your hand, offended for exactly one heartbeat. The sun warms your knuckles. The bees continue their reasonable work, the way bookkeepers would if numbers had petals. Scholars still argue how far these meadow herbs were managed by intention versus accepted as gifts. Some say households kept small herb plots at the edges of fields, encouraging thyme and savory and mint in deliberate, weeded squares. Others suggest the plants spread themselves along paths and stones, harvested where they pleased and named garden only when someone remembered to be proud. The pottery, seeds, and bits of old writing refuse to agree in a way that would satisfy a single theory: scholarly uncertainty. The meadow accepts both answers, possibly because it is tired of being asked. You move through the hum the way swimmers move through warm water, without needing to lift your arms. Butterflies tilt and correct themselves with the solemnity of priests choosing where to stand. A mantis, the color of dry grass, makes a yes-no gesture at the air and is satisfied by its own diplomacy. The cow's tail writes short sentences behind her, punctuation for a grammar of flies. You find a flat stone set low in the grass, sun hot on top, cool at its lip where the shadow begins. Someone once sat here often enough for the seat to have a memory. You oblige it. From this angle, the river is a bright strip stitching the meadow to the world you left on the other side of the reeds. You catch a glimpse of the rope on the willow, pale against the green. You imagine the watchman's staff making its small, patient circles in the dust. You break a sprig and hold it to your nose. The perfume is larger than the sprig's size deserves, a reminder that not all strength is theatrical. You think how cooks in low houses turned meat with sprigs like this, bruising them against hot clay. How bathers crushed them in their fists and breathed deep. How mourners might have tucked them into belts or hair to teach the air to behave. All of it ordinary, all of it correct, none of it in a hurry. The cow finds clover and forgets the rest of the earth for the time it takes to finish a patch. You lean back on your hands. The sky has deepened by the width of a thought. The mountains pretend they were always this close. Ants work a problem under your heel that you kindly relocate. Your shadow grows companionable. A lark drops a single note that sounds like a bead striking wood. You look up and find nothing but height and a small insistence in it. The bees shift their key as a cloud passes and then, after agreeing among themselves, return to the earlier key. The meadow smells briefly sweeter, some pocket of crushed plant exhaling its private summer. You imagine the time here, in other seasons. Frost collecting like powder on each tiny leaf. Rain turning the cushions into dark aromatic sponges. Spring pushing new green through last year's brown as if explaining the same lesson to a more attentive class. You imagine hands gathering, twisting, tying little bundles that dry in a roof's temperate shadow, then crumble into jars that remember the meadow whenever lids are lifted. The cow wanders back toward you, and the hum knots itself loosely around her knees. A bee bounces from her flank and decides to reconsider its life goals on a flower. She lets out a small breath that sounds like relief from no particular hardship. You reach to scratch the place between her jaw and throat where the rope rested earlier, and she leans a little into your fingers as if agreeing with your memory of the knot that wasn't quite a knot. You lie down. The time understands and makes room. The ground carries your weight in a way that feels like being counted and forgiven. Somewhere behind the reeds, the river remembers that it will be a sea someday and practices its lines. The watchman, though you cannot see him, continues the profession of attention. A ladybird clambers over a stem, finds the summit, and forgives it for being small. If there is a lesson here, it is not written in large letters. It smells faintly of pepper and honey. It sounds like bees deciding unanimously. It looks like green that has learned to be patient with feet. You let it happen to you, without needing to keep it afterward. When you stand, the time unwrinkles itself, and the hum closes the small person-shaped hole you made in the sound. On your way back through the reeds, you look once over your shoulder. The meadow is the same, which is to say, it has changed into a slightly later meadow and is pleased with the result. Your hands keep the scent even after you wash them in the river. The cow follows, carrying a piece of sunlight on her horn, like an accidentally stolen coin. The bees do not file a complaint. You said, continued. ChatGPT said, Section 17. The story keeps trying to tell itself, but it arrives in fragments, like reeds that float downriver one at a time. You sit with your back against the laurel and let the pieces drift in without reaching to arrange them. A nymph whose name presses on the inside of your tongue. A queen who measures her world with exactness and then misplaces the measure. A cow who understands grass better than justice. None of it hurries. None of it requires you to do more than breathe at the pasture's pace. From the far slope, a sheep bells twice, as if reminding the day not to overlook its own chores. The watchman stands in his patch of sun, not stone and not tree, but something like both in his willingness to remain. The cow moves past your knee. Her hide brushes your sleeve and leaves the gentle grit of dust and pollen. You catch the scent of her warm hay sweet with the faint animal clarity that barns remember after a decade. You try to order the tale, and it politely refuses. It prefers to be a list of true moments. A garland that forgot color but kept shape. A rope that remembered hands. Milk that cooled the tongue and behaved. If there were a reason for anything that happened, it has gone into storage somewhere high and quiet. The thought doesn't trouble you. You are old enough, in this hour at least, to accept errands without instructions. Yet the fragments carry their own modest authorities. There are objects dug from the earth shards of painted clay, little bronze tokens, images where a girl with a wreath stands beside an altar, or where a many-eyed keeper leans on a staff and declines to blink. There are lines copied and recopied, poets praising the queen with cow, quiet eyes, travelers noting a small rural shrine, priests recording the weight of offerings in neat ink that turns the same brown in every century. Mainstream historical fact. The fragments don't sing, but they hum the way bees do when no one is asking them to. Across the river, a wind walks the willows from left to right, then right to left, practicing both opinions. The cow raises her head and watches the performance without making a review of it. A dragonfly makes a green dash between shadows and then hangs, motionless, as if nailed to the light by a pin made of air. A small odd rumor your grandmother once liked to repeat arrives with the smell of warming mud. She claimed there was another version of this tale, not the famous one, seldom told aloud, in which the queen's anger missed its mark not once but several times, turning into swallows or springs or even a rain of little seeds that bounced and sprouted and made the fields busy. Anger becomes food if you leave it alone, she would say, and then she would peel fruit with a knife so steady even the peel felt respected. You never found the source of that rumor anywhere but her kitchen. It has lived rent-free in your head ever since, keeping the pantry tidy, quirky, or fringe tidbit. You think of names and how they travel. The nymph's name, which will not let itself be caught this morning, floats at the edge of hearing. It feels like a bright syllable folded inside a softer one. Perhaps the river knows it. Perhaps the watchman has it written on the inside of one of his patient eyelids. You decide not to ask. Asking is a way of tightening the day. Today seems better loose. The sun has moved enough to change the color of the dust. It is less gold now, more the pale of old parchment. You rub your forefinger against your thumb and it squeaks faintly, as if agreeing with a proposition you forgot to make. The cow's tail swishes once, twice, signing her name on the air. Scholars still argue about the deeper currents under this gentle surface. Was the nymph once a river itself, a person made of water, wearing human shape for a few scenes, and then returning to the honest business of moving downhill? Was the cow a borrowed symbol from older pasture gods, stitched into a later queen's wardrobe for the sake of a better fit? Did men with pens in city rooms smooth rural spirits into family dramas because city rooms prefer stories with chairs and arguments? The answers scatter like minnows, bright and unwilling to be held. Scholarly uncertainty. The uncertainty feels correct here. You could not improve it without damaging it. You inventory what you actually know from today, which is more than yesterday required, and less than tomorrow will pretend to need. The rope was flax and liked a little oil. The shrine enjoyed time. Milk behaved honorably in clay. The watchman approved of stillness and practiced it until the ground learned the trick from him. The cow accepted the world's errors and converted them into cud. These are trustworthy facts, even if they do not impress a courtroom. A grasshopper lands on your knee with the confidence of a guest expected by nobody but welcomed by everyone. It adjusts its legs with the small orthopedic noises grasshoppers make, and then faces the watchman as if preparing to be counted. The watchman does not disappoint it. Somewhere in the reeds, a bird clears its throat and decides against singing. You imagine, for a moment, the queen herself, standing where you stand, not in gold, not attended, not dramatic, just a woman who has carried her titles long enough that they feel like weather rather than garments. She would lift a laurel leaf to her nose and approve the smell, then forget why she approved it. She might notice the cow and feel an unnamed tug, a small knot in the thread of thought that won't smooth. She would not ask for explanations. Queens don't. They allow unresolved things to accompany them like polite ghosts. You reach for the river and let it cool your fingers. The mud under the water remembers your hand from earlier and offers the same smooth resistance. A leaf from the laurel loosens, almost changes its mind, and then continues its fall. It lands with the lightest kiss on the surface and begins a slow voyage that requires no oars and accepts no schedule. A boy appears on the far path, leading two goats who disagree about the meaning of forward. He is patient in the way children learn to be when animals teach them. He sees you, sees the cow, sees the watchman, and raises his chin in a salute, learned from someone who has saluted the sun each morning of his life. He passes out of the frame. The goats discover, too late, that they wanted to argue in the other direction. The cow lies down with the practicality of a stone, choosing a place to be. You feel the thud of her weight through the ground, a slow punctuation mark at the end of a long, agreeable sentence. Her jaw keeps its small revolutions. Her eyelids drift lower and hold there, a compromise between sleep and the courtesy of being awake in company. You mirror her, easing down until your shoulder finds the laurel's patient trunk. The thought returns that you might spend the rest of the day not solving this tale and be improved by the failure. Reasons are brittle. Mornings like this are flexible. The watchman's eyes soften in pairs, then sharpen again in pairs, as if blinking in stanzas. The river resumes its summary of events. Water moved past. Light altered. Creatures considered. Nothing urgent required a vote. The summary is sufficient. In your mind, for a breath, the fragments align. A queen exact as the line on a potter's wheel. A nymph whose name would taste right if you could say it. A watchman collecting moments like pebbles and refusing to skip any. A cow who keeps grazing through it all, faith made into muscle. The alignment lasts as long as a dragonfly's hover and breaks without leaving crumbs. You are not disappointed. You are relieved. Stories are better companions when they can walk beside you without asking to be carried. You close your eyes, and the world grows louder in the particular way it does when you stop looking at it. The bees take a step closer. The laurel smell climbs a rung. The cow's breath becomes a weather pattern of its own, a soft inland tide. Somewhere, the boy with goats discovers he is whistling and pretends he meant to. The watchman's staff ticks once against a root, a deliberate second hand on a clock that refuses to tell time. You will forget parts of this later. You will remember other parts too clearly and try to tell them to someone who nods and smiles and asks, kindly, whether the cow had a name. You will say you think she did, but that everyone present agreed not to use it. It was the sort of agreement reached without speaking, the sort that holds better than an oath, and you will mean it. The laurel gives one more leaf to the river. The meadow shifts its weight and finds the comfortable place again. The cow, eyes half closed, chews the same small lesson she has been teaching since morning. You learn it, forget it, and learn it again, all before the next breeze completes its errand. Argus is tying something. You don't notice at first, because his hands move as if they've been moving since before you began watching him this morning. The rope is thin, made of two colors of fiber, twisted together, pale like flax, and darker like goat hair. It loops over his fingers in a pattern that doesn't seem to make sense until it suddenly does, like a path on a hillside that reveals itself only when you're standing far enough away. He works with the patience of someone who believes the knot will wait for him, and perhaps even grow better if it is given time to think. Each pull is exact, each tuck deliberate. The many eyes watch in relays, one on his work, one on the cow, one on the sky above the laurel, another on a beetle, trying to climb a reed and reconsidering halfway. You think of the knots you've known in other places, the rawhide ties of a gate latch, the loops that secure fish traps in a river current, the neat spiral binding of herbs left to dry above a hearth. Rope and cord have been twisting around human hands for longer than stories have been writing about it. In the ships carved into ancient pots, you can see the curving lines that once lashed sails. In the fields, nets for olives or figs. In the temples, cords that held offerings in place before the wind could change their mind. Mainstream historical fact. You watch his fingers and imagine every knot in every season as a cousin to this one. The cow stands nearby, chewing in her steady half-dream. When Argus glances at her, he makes a small adjustment to the length of the rope, not to control, but to acknowledge her size, her shape, the simple dignity of her neck. The gesture is so slight it might have been only the rope breathing. You remember a thing once told to you by a man who mended fishing nets at the harbor. He swore that if you finish a knot by tucking a strand against the sun instead of away from it, the cord will last a season longer. He said it was because the sun likes to see how things end. He would never work indoors for that reason, even in winter. He didn't mind his hands cracking. He said it made them grip the rope more honestly. Quirky or fringe tidbit. You wonder if Argus knows that trick, or if he has his own that he doesn't share with strangers. The knot now in his hands is a closed loop, with a second loop riding on its back, like one creature giving another a lift. He tugs both ends once, twice, then presses the join flat between his thumb and forefinger. The fibers relax in a way that suggests they were waiting to be told what they were. Historians still argue about the knots in the old myths, whether they were symbolic, practical, or both. In some vase scenes, the cord on the transformed nymph's neck looks ceremonial, more ribbon than halter. In others, it's plainly the tool of a keeper, meant to hold an animal in place. Was the rope a sign of ownership, of protection, or simply of presence? The evidence is tangled. Threads of story pull in one direction, threads of art in another. Practical knowledge, like Argus's hands, ignores the argument and gets on with the work. Scholarly uncertainty. Argus lifts the rope for inspection, turning it so the light slides along each twist. The darker goat hair catches the sun differently than the pale flax, making the cord look faintly striped. Two of his eyes squint at the join, then relax. Another two are already watching the water. You sit closer, curious but not questioning. To ask about the knot would be to make it explain itself, and good knots resist that. Better to let them live in the place between fingers and memory. Argus passes the rope once between his palms, as if smoothing it into obedience, then hangs it loosely over his staff, where it drapes like a ribbon with its own opinion. The cow shifts her weight and looks briefly toward the mountains, then toward the meadow. She does not appear to notice the knot at all, though you suspect she would feel its difference if it touched her. Her trust is the sort that lets rope and grass exist side by side without a quarrel. A breeze crosses the meadow and lifts the tail of the rope just enough to make it sway. One of Argus's eyes follows this motion all the way to stillness. You wonder if he ties knots for himself when no one is looking, not for work, not for ceremony, just to see what shapes are possible when the day is quiet. The beetle on the reed finally makes its decision, opens its wings, and vanishes into the air. Argus's hands stay exactly where they are, patient for the next thing worth holding. The knot waits with him, already complete, already willing to be untied if the moment calls for it. You find the olive tree without trying to find anything at all. It waits at the meadow's far edge, where the soil begins to lift toward the low hills, its trunk as thick as the cow's flank and more twisted than a rope left too long in the sun. The bark is a map of furrows and ridges, each holding a small darkness. You place your hand against it and feel the roughness give way, here and there, to smooth patches polished by years of passing shoulders and idle palms. The branches begin low, leaning outward before they think about climbing. Their leaves are narrow ovals, dark on one side and silver on the other, and the wind turns them in unison so that the tree flashes like a slow school of fish. The shade beneath is pieced together from thousands of small shadows. It feels cooler than the meadow, but warmer than the riverbank, a compromise the day seems to admire. Olive trees have lived in these lands longer than most names. Their roots can outlast storms. Their branches can be cut back to stumps and still return. People have gathered their fruit for oil and for eating since before writing grew confident enough to mention it. Ancient presses, carved from single blocks of stone, still sit in quiet fields. Amphorae, stamped with the mark of an oil's origin, have been lifted from shipwrecks where they rested like sleeping jars. Mainstream historical fact. You imagine those jars tilted to the light, the oil inside moving slowly as if reluctant to leave. The cow follows you into the patchy shade, lowering her head to nose at the fallen leaves. She mouths one, chews once, then lets it fall. The watchman remains by the laurel but angles his head so a few of his eyes can see into this corner of the meadow. A shepherd once told you, without blinking, that an olive tree will not truly shade you unless you tell it a story. They are old enough to expect conversation, he said. He claimed that if you sat under one and stayed silent, the light would find its way through the leaves just to bother you. But if you talked about anything at all, the leaves would arrange themselves to keep you comfortable. Quirky or fringe tidbit. You decide to test this by telling the tree about the cow's mourning, leaving out nothing of consequence. The shade seems to deepen, though you admit to yourself this may be the wind's doing. Your fingers find a notch in the trunk where a branch was cut long ago. The wood there is dark and hard, with rings visible in cross-section like the ripples from a pebble dropped in water. The smell rising from it is faintly resinous, a dry sweetness mixed with dust. Above, the olives are still small and green, hard as pebbles. They will not be ready until the air is cooler and the light has learned to arrive at a lower angle. Scholars still argue whether the earliest cultivated olives in this region were grown from cuttings brought by sea traders or from the quiet encouragement of wild groves that already knew these soils. Some point to pollen records and charred pits in hearths. Others to patterns in pottery stamps that suggest a deliberate, managed crop. The arguments bend like the branches in a wind, meeting and parting without conclusion. Scholarly uncertainty. You sit with your back against the trunk and feel the way it holds the ground. The cow settles nearby, curling her legs beneath her and sighing once, the way a door sighs when it knows it has closed for the day. A grasshopper clicks through the air and lands on your knee, testing its footing on the fabric. The shade takes on a greenish cast, light sifting through the leaves to paint your hands. Somewhere in the branches, a dove murmurs, then decides quiet is better. The wind lifts again, turning all the leaves silver side out before letting them fall back into their usual colors. You think about the oil pressed from these fruits, thick, gold green, carrying the bitterness of the pit and the sweetness of the flesh together. You imagine it in a clay lamp at dusk, the flames steady and small, poured over bread with herbs, rubbed into wood to keep it from splitting, dripped onto a lock to persuade it to turn. The uses are many, but here, under the tree, none of them are urgent. The cow's jaw resumes its slow rotation. You match your breathing to it without realizing, the air carrying the scents of leaf, dust, and animal. The watchman's distant shape is a still knot in the brighter field. The olive tree's branches creak once, as if shifting in its long seat. For a while, there is nothing to do but be part of the shade. The cow exhales against your arm, and the warmth settles there, as if it has decided to stay. Her breath smells of hay sweetened by clover, with a faint undertone of river water, the kind of scent that belongs equally to morning and to evening. You keep still, so you don't lose it too soon. The air is soft here under the olive's leaves, but her breath carries its own weather, a small private climate you are allowed to visit. She leans in, not heavily, just enough that you feel the shift of her weight through the ground. Her muzzle brushes your sleeve and leaves behind a damp crescent that cools in the breeze. You lift your hand to her cheek, where the hair is short and lies flat over the muscle. When you move your fingers up toward the jaw, you can feel the rhythm of chewing still traveling through bone. It is a slow, circular pulse, as steady as the river's current. Cattle have been part of these valleys for so many centuries that their breath, their hide, their sounds have woven into the place's memory. Ancient bones, horn tips, and even imprints of hooves have been found in the packed floors of old enclosures. They sit now in trays in quiet rooms, labeled and measured, though no label can quite hold the living smell of grass turned into warmth. Mainstream historical fact. You imagine those bones once moving through a meadow not unlike this one, carrying the same deep, even breath from nostrils to air. The cow flicks an ear forward and back again. Her tail swishes once, slow and certain, touching the ground with the faintest hiss of dust. You notice that her breathing makes a tiny sound, not a sigh, not a snort, but something in between, as if she is testing the air before letting it go. You remember a peculiar saying from a dairyman in another village. If a cow breathes on you while the sun is still low, it means she trusts you. If she does it at noon, she's asking for something you've forgotten to give. If she does it in the evening, she's telling you the weather will change. When you asked him how to tell the difference between trust and request, he said, "You'll know the breath feels different," and then refused to say more. Quirky or fringe tidbit. The warmth fades slowly from your arm, but the memory of it lingers longer than you expect. You wonder if the cow notices how your own breath matches hers now, long in, long out, with the pause in between that says, there is no need to hurry. Historians still argue whether the close bond between herders and their cattle in the ancient world was practical alone, or whether it carried something like companionship. Some sources suggest animals were valued strictly for work and food. Others describe them in ways that sound like kin, given names and treated with small honors. The truth may have been both or neither, or something unrecorded in the spaces between the lines. Scholarly uncertainty. The cow lowers her head to graze again, but stays near, so that her flank brushes your knee each time she steps forward. You run your fingers lightly along her neck and feel the steady rise and fall under the hide. A fly lands on her shoulder. She shakes once, and the fly departs in a zigzag of disapproval. The shade moves with the sun, bringing both of you into a patch of light for a few minutes. Her hide gleams where it catches the sun, but her breath stays the same, warm, sweet, unhurried. You close your eyes for a while, letting it mix with the scent of olive leaves and dry earth. When you open them again, the watchman is watching you. One pair of eyes on your face, another on the cow's. He does not speak, but you think he has seen this exchange before, perhaps many times, and keeps it stored with the other things he never forgets. The cow breathes out once more, and the warmth gathers on your skin like a small, silent gift. You let it be. The sound reaches you like warm air rolling downhill, not loud, not sharp, just a single bronze note that stretches into the meadow and thins itself among the reeds. You call it a bell because no other word fits the way it carries. It rings once, then once again after a space long enough for the first to forget itself. The cow lifts her head between the two notes, listens in the manner of an animal who is good at listening, then returns to her chewing as if the bell had nodded to her and she had nodded back. The river keeps its own voice under the bells, a low, uninsistent conversation with stones. The olive leaves answer by turning silver for the length of a breath. On the far slope, a small point of moving light betrays metal catching sun. Perhaps the bell itself as someone's hand sets it swaying. Perhaps only a buckle. Perhaps a fiction invented by your eyes to give the sound a body. You are willing to let all three be true for now. Bells have belonged to fields for a very long time. In these lands, small bronze codones were hung from the necks of sheep and goats, so a flock could be counted by ear when scrub and distance hid the bodies. Their little tongues marked the moving edges of pasture. Such bells have been found in graves, storerooms, and even as offerings at rural sanctuaries where herders asked for ordinary mercies. Grass enough, teeth untroubled, births without drama. Mainstream historical fact. You imagine a line of animals coming home at dusk, each note announcing a life that has not wandered. A third stroke comes, farther away or softer. It's hard to tell. It's the kind of sound that moves through you rather than around you. The watchman tips his head a shade, and three of his eyes attend to the direction, while others continue their usual work of counting light and shade. The cow's ear swivels toward the hills and then relaxes. You remember a shepherd's odd advice, offered with a kind of seriousness that refuses to be laughed at. Tie a thread of red wool to the bell's loop when lambing begins, and the note will turn lucky, drawing newborns to their feet faster, persuading milk to settle in the right places, and teaching dogs to mind their shadows. He showed you a bell scuffed bright, where fingers had worried the thread in passing. He claimed that if the red faded to brown before the first full moon, you should bury it under the threshold and start again. Quirky, or fringe tidbit. You don't argue with customs that make people gentle with metal. The bell's next call overlaps the wing beat of a crow. For a heartbeat, the two sounds braid, then wander off in their own directions, both pleased. The laurel shade has crept a palm's width closer to the river. The olives has loosened itself into narrower strips. You try to measure the distance to the bell by its patience and give up content to let it be exactly as far as it needs to be to remain interesting. The meadow knows how to make room for a note. Bees widen their hum as if to host it. A grasshopper pauses mid-step and becomes a blade of something for the duration. Even the flies seem to remember politeness for a moment and choose a leaf over a face. The cow chews through all of it, her jaw making its own round music, the old song of grass accepting its fate and becoming milk. Scholars still argue what some of the little bells found in sacred and domestic places were for. Were they truly livestock bells, strayed from collars and kept as tokens? Were they ritual instruments to wake a small altar's attention, or to scold a draft from a doorway? Were they fastened to doors, harness, or even garments as apotropaic noise against the evil eye? The contexts are mixed, the texts are stingy, the images are unhelpful at the exact moments you want precision. Scholarly uncertainty. The uncertainty sits lightly here, like dust on a blade of grass. You picture a hand, any century reaching up to touch a bell after it sounds, steadying it with a fingertip so the last ring does not embarrass itself by going on too long. You feel, in your own finger, the tremble that would travel down from bronze to skin. You picture that same hand checking a strap, smoothing a tuft of wool that is caught under the loop, the small courtesies that keep metal and animal honest with each other. Another note arrives, and this one you are sure is nearer, though the light has not changed to prove it. The cow raises her head and breathes out a thin line of warmth that crosses your wrist. The watchman lets two eyes rest, as if he has cataloged the bell and found no fault worth reporting. A boy appears for a moment on the ridge, a thread of goats behind him like punctuation marks. One of the goats tosses its head. The light jumps. The sound agrees to follow. You try out the idea that the bell might be part of a shrine's small routine, a clapper against a hanging tongue set in motion when someone leaves a sprig of thyme or straightens a pebble. You also try the idea that it is only what it seems, a simple shepherd's bell doing exactly the job its maker poured it to do. Both ideas feel comfortable in the mouth. Neither demands to be swallowed whole. The river gives back a muted echo that may be the bell's, or may be the river's own opinion about bronze. The olive leaves make a whispered answer, like felt being folded. A dragonfly writes a single, bright line across the air and signs it with silence. When the next ring fails to come, you notice its absence the way you notice a breeze that has just decided the errand was finished. The meadow tightens and then loosens, as if remembering how to be sufficient on its own. The cow lowers her head with gratitude and sets to the next patch. The watchman resumes, counting nothing with great accuracy. You close your eyes and find the note still ringing somewhere in your chest, where useful sounds go to live after they have done their work. It will stay there for a while, equal to the distance and indifferent to the hour. When you open your eyes, the day is exactly as you left it, only one bell richer. The ground holds stories best when it is newly wet. You step from the olive's patchwork shade to the narrow lip of bank, where last night's dew and the river's slow breath have left the earth tender. There, as though someone had pressed a soft thought into the world, are footprints. They begin at the water's edge and walk away toward the low rise, a careful line of ovals darkened by moisture. You crouch, because crouching is the grammar of looking closely. The first print is sharp as a sentence. The next is already letting go of its edges. The third is starting to forget it was ever a print at all. You put your hand beside the nearest one. Your palm is a clumsy scholar compared to the ground's exactness, but it tries. The shape is not hooved, it is not pawed. It looks like a human foot, narrower than a man's, longer than a child's, the heel firm, the arch light, the toes pressed as if the walker did not hurry but did intend to keep going. A thin runnel where water has retreated glints beside the heel, a miniature river sliding off toward the big one. The cow comes to stand behind you, and you feel her breath crease the hair at the back of your neck before warming your shoulder. You rise and follow the prints, because following is what feet ask of you. They lift from the bank to the meadow's first incline, crossing a scatter of crushed thyme that answers with a scent loud enough to be called generous. The line of steps wavers just enough to convince you there was no staff in the hand, no burden on the back, or, if there was, it did not trouble the balance. The watchman watches, one pair of eyes on the ground before you, another skimming the farther rise where the prints likely dissolve into ordinary grass. In old landscapes like this, tracks become paths, and paths become the slow arteries of lives. Long before deep-cut roads and measurable milestones, The country was stitched together by goatways and footways, by lines trodden thin between fields and springs, shrines and threshing floors. Stones set upright at the edge of a path, sometimes simple waymarkers, sometimes small herms with a face and a beard, and a square confidence signaled turns and boundaries. Wells wore the stain of hands that knew where to stop walking. Mainstream historical fact. You picture such a marker somewhere ahead, just beyond the place where the prints intend to become absence. The next few steps are lighter. The sun has widened and begins its tidy work of erasing. You speed up as much as a calm morning allows, lowering your head like a reader eager not to lose his place. The ground begins to dry higher on the slope. The prints grow shy. You squint and find them by the faint dark that lingers at the toe, the way a thought lingers after it has been spoken softly. A small countryside belief returns to you with a smell of wet clay attached. A plowman once told you that if you meet new footprints by water at dawn, you should step into the last one and stand until your own breath matches the air's its. He swore this would make you arrive where they were going someday, no matter how many turns later, not by magic, he insisted, but because your feet would have learned the lesson of someone else's intention. He added that you should leave one of your prints deep and one light, as a courtesy to whatever walks behind you. Quirky or fringe tidbit. You try the standing part. The earth accepts your weight with a small, satisfied sound. Nothing changes except your breathing, which becomes less about ownership and more about tenancy. Higher up, the meadow tilts into a brighter green and the prints surrender. You kneel and try to see what you cannot see, the way one listens for rain before the first drop admits itself. There, perhaps the suggestion of a heel. Here, a twin flattening of grass that might be a pair of side-by-side steps. Beyond that, nothing but the honest argument of wind and stalk. You look back. Down near the water, the prints are clearer again, a sentence fragment still readable. Between, the slope has eaten the claws. Scholars still argue about tracks like these, when they harden into stone or persist as grooves on hillsides. Some swear that certain ruts are the inheritance of carts and sledges, practical lines worn by seasons of transport. Others claim the same grooves belong to processions' feet that learned to be ceremonial or to older, sacred driftways, whose meanings are now stuck to the edges of words we keep using. Even the little herms, when found toppled or faceless, are accused of being both boundary stones and gods, depending on who answers the question first. The truth may be layered. Animal paths promoted to human use, human paths promoted to piety, and then promoted back again to errands. Scholarly uncertainty. The hillside, asked for an opinion, replies by warming your knees through your clothes. The cow has followed as far as the time. She stops there and takes up her work with a conviction that never requires evidence. The watchman remains below, his staff now a vertical line laid against the river's horizontal. A grasshopper flings itself from a blade and remembers how to be a blade when it lands, in case you plan to take attendance. You trace the last certain print with your finger, noticing how the toe was pressed a little deeper than the heel here, as if the walker leaned forward to look at something ahead. You come to the place where the earth has decided to be dry today. The print thins to a rumor, then to nothing. Your eyes, still wanting, begin to invent. That slight dark could be a step. That bend of grass might be agreement. You scold your eyes gently and let them have their habits without giving them the dignity of certainty. A few paces farther, you find a compromise the sun hasn't corrected yet, a faint crescent scuff on a bare patch where wind has shown the subsoil. It turns uphill, toward a line of low stones half sunk in turf, not a wall, exactly, but the idea of one. Perhaps a field's old lip, perhaps a terrace that forgot what it was terracing, perhaps a boundary that held a conversation with a neighbor for several generations and then grew tired of the topic. You stand there and allow the prints to reassemble themselves in your head, walking neatly along the edge. Another memory surfaces. This one you can't place, perhaps a priest's apprentice, perhaps a traveler who talked too much. He said that if you sprinkle a cupful of water in front of a footprint at noon, the print will show its owner's mood for that hour. Calm. If the water sits, restless. If it beads and runs, resolute. If it sinks at the toe, he admitted he had tested it once and found only mud. You decide not to carry water uphill to disprove what isn't asking to be proved. Another fringe practice, kept because it makes people look closely. From here, the river is a narrow brightness stitched into darker greens. The laurel is a bead on the thread, the rope on the willow a pale stitch. The watchman's many eyes are too small to count, so you accept their number as sufficient. You turn in place and take one step of your own, heel then toe, letting the ground have your weight in a way it can understand. The print you leave is as clear as any at the bank. The next will not be. The third will fail kindly. That is the law this slope keeps and enforces without malice. You follow the non-path toward the low stones because you have become curious about what a person who liked water and morning might have wanted from a hill. You find nothing but more grass, which is a good outcome disguised as nothing. A lark takes offense at your presence and then forgives you. The wind evens itself and translates the thyme's smell into a hint rather than a claim. When you return, you walk beside your own new prints and watch them begin their brief career as memories. They darken when a small cloud passes. They lighten when the cloud forgets you. Down by the bank, the original set is still there, already less crisp, still more real than the ones you made for comparison. You stand over the first step and let the day align itself again. River pulling, sun erasing, meadow insisting on being a meadow. The cow greets you by choosing the patch nearest your knee. The watchman gives you the attention he gives to weather, sufficient and untroubled. You wipe a smudge of damp earth on your palm across your thigh and leave a mark shaped vaguely like a foot, which pleases you and the earth equally. If someone asked later, you could say with honesty, the prints went uphill and then forgot themselves. You could add, they were human, size, and unhurried. You could even confess that for a breath you believed they were a message addressed to you. But the meadow, when consulted, would offer its typical ruling that all paths are true until the sun asks them to be humble. You sit with that verdict and find it restful. The rope on the willow has a way of catching the light without asking for it. You walk toward it along the bank, hearing the sound change under your feet from the thick hush of grass to the soft tearing of reeds, and then to the gentle crunch of sand where the river sometimes leaves its bed behind. The willow leans as if trying to drink without standing in line, its branches lowering themselves into the water like tired arms. The rope hangs from one of the thicker limbs, knotted in two places, the lower end brushing the current. It's not new rope. The fibers are swollen from years of taking in water, then drying, then taking it in again. They smell faintly of silt and sun, with something like hemp underneath. A fray near the top has been rubbed smooth by many hands gripping just below it. The cow stops a few paces away, as though she knows the bank here is narrow and would rather watch than join. Ropes have been part of riverbanks for as long as people have wanted to pull things from water or lower themselves into it. In ancient harbors, thick mooring lines kept ships from drifting with the tide. Along quieter rivers, simpler cords and woven braids marked swimming places, ferry points, or washing spots where women leaned over to beat clothes against stones. Archaeologists have found impressions of old ropes in the clay of river walls, the twist of fibers perfectly preserved after the rope itself was gone. Mainstream historical fact. This one might have been for a ferry once, or for tying up small boats, or for the simpler work of giving children something to hold on to when they splashed in the shallows. You remember a fisherman's superstition. If you leave a rope in the water long enough to grow green with algae, it will remember the shape of the fish that pass by. And the next time you use it, the fish will come back to be counted. He swore he'd pulled the same carp twice that way, though no one could prove it was the same fish. Quirky or fringe tidbit. You take the rope in your hand. It's heavier than you expect, and colder. When you lift it, drops fall from its end, marking dark coins on the sand before disappearing. The willow's branch above shifts slightly, acknowledging the change in weight but not resisting. You swing the rope once, slowly, just to see the arc. The sound it makes against the water is soft, a wet brushstroke. Historians still argue about how much rivers like this one were used for local transport versus being left as boundaries. Some records show active ferries and crossings every few miles. Others suggest long stretches were simply admired from the bank while goods and people moved by paths inland. Without enough surviving docks or mooring posts, the argument drifts the rope could mean a ferry once landed here, or it could mean nothing more than someone liked the idea of lowering themselves into the current. Scholarly uncertainty. You let the rope fall back to its resting place. The fibers soak up the water again without complaint. A small fish, curious or indifferent, brushes past it before darting into a patch of shadow under the willow's own reflection. Standing here, you notice how the current is gentler than in the center of the river. Leaves gather in a slow spiral before slipping away downstream. The cow swishes her tail once, the tip catching a glint of sun before she lowers her head to nibble at a stubborn reed. The rope will stay where it is until the branch grows tired or the river takes it, and neither seems in a hurry. You step back onto firmer ground, letting the sound of water and rope untangle in your mind until they are both part of the same quiet. The day empties itself of color the way a bowl drains after you stop tipping it. The meadow thins to silhouettes. The river becomes a band of pewter scraped with faint light. One by one, the first points open in the sky, as if someone were testing a sieve with water and deciding the holes are the right size. Argus stands a little apart from the laurel now, staff planted, head tipped back, and you understand why people have always said he counted. His many eyes do not blink together. They take turns, like sentries passing a soft word down a line. The cow lowers herself with the slow certainty of a stone choosing ground. Her breath makes brief clouds that do not travel far. When she settles, the meadow seems to settle a little too, as if her weight had reminded it where the middle is. A cricket rehearses 3 notes, and then agrees to repeat them forever. The olive and the willow trade shadows back and forth until neither can remember whose turn it is. Long ago, on nights that smelled like this warm earth cooling, damp rising from low water, people marked their work by what rose and set. The Pleiades, the little knot of stars, told sowers and reapers when to begin, when to bring the sickle back out. Arcturus sailed high to warn of winds and harvest. Orion shouldered up and the colder chores began. Hesiod's old, durable advice about these things is as clear as a path in dew. Watch the risings and settings and let them teach your calendar, because sky keeps time when people are tempted to fib about it. Mainstream historical fact. You look for the 7, find 6 easily, and decide the 7th is hiding behind someone's patient eyelash. Argus's eyes climb with the evening. One pair chooses the first bright wanderer, Hesperos, the evening star posting itself low and generous above the hills. Another set attends to the faint stripe of the Milky Way spreading like flowers spilled across a dark table. A third pair seems to count only the river's reflections, which double the sky and pretend the world has more stars than it knows what to do with. A fringe belief you half remember returns, hilarious and sincere. An aunt once warned you never to count stars aloud, or you'd wake with warts shaped like tiny shields on your knuckles. A shepherd, hearing that, corrected her without blinking. Counting was fine, he said, as long as you left 1 star uncounted for luck to live in. Another woman swore that if you could name 5 constellations before the first night breeze reached you from the hills, your next journey would find good inns with mattresses that didn't argue. Quirky or fringe tidbit. You keep your numbers to yourself and name nothing out loud, which feels like both obedience and freedom. The watchman shifts so slightly, you notice only because the staff makes a new shallow ring in the dust. Counting, you see, is not only number. It is attention sorted into piles. Bright, brighter, brief, moved, unmoving. When a meteorite pin scratches the dark and erases itself, 2 of his eyes follow the gone thing as if the line still existed for those who remember it. Another eye tests a dim star near the horizon and, finding it steadier than a firefly, admits it to the ledger. Scholars still argue about the older names that country people in these regions gave the stars, the local nicknames that rarely make it into the polished lists. Which cluster was the hen and chicks here and not somewhere else? Which bright wanderer carried a village's debt and so was never pointed at with a knife? Even in the written systems, debates persist about exactly which rising ancient poets meant true heliacal rising, or some later, practical first seeing, and how processions slid calendars out of tune over centuries until farmers quietly retuned them with their own eyes. The texts gesture one way. The sky, which declines to be archived, gestures another. Scholarly uncertainty. Argus solves the problem by looking, which is how most lasting problems are solved in fields. The evening star grows braver. You watch it throw a thin road of light into the river, which obliges for a few handspans and then forgets. In some households, the old distinction survived for a long time: Hesperos at dusk, Phosphoros at dawn, though philosophers, and later everyone else, knew they were one and the same traveler, wearing two appointments on the same day. You have no appointment except to be here, which is the easiest one to keep. The cow snorts in her sleep, a soft correction to a dream that was about to make a wrong turn. You smile without teeth and pull your cloak imaginary or remembered closer. A bat does accounting in the air just above the reeds, taking small debts from small creditors with audible satisfaction. Argus's eyes, if they could hum, would hum in chords now. You try an experiment. Close your eyes and lift your face. The cool finds your forehead first, then your cheeks, then the bridge of your nose, where the day has left a line of warmth like a farmer's boundary stone. Behind your lids, darkness keeps a faint map of the brightest stars. When you open them, the real sky is both more and less than the map. More stars, less certainty. It is always like this when you compare memory to the thing itself. A second streak crosses high, quiet as regret. You don't make a wish. You are already inside one. The laurel moves a few leaves as if taking attendance. Somewhere upriver, a bell tries a single, shy note and thinks better of being important. You think about how counting can be a kindness. Shepherds count so nothing is missing. Mothers count because sleep loves numbers. Watchmen count to keep loss from getting upper hand. Priests count their offerings and their silences. Sailors count to find their way back to breakfast. Argus counts because the night is full and nothing full should be left untallied. There is relief in it, not control. The Milky Way brightens until the river envies it. The air takes on that late-hour clarity when sounds travel a little farther than they should. From the hills, a dog barks once, from very near your shoulder. The cow answers with a breath that says, all clear. The olive, which has been a tree for longer than you have been anything, creaks its gratitude to the cooler air. Argus lowers one pair of eyes and meets yours. He does not smile, not exactly, but something like agreement passes through the many pupils and settles, as if to say, you see that I see. It is enough. He returns his gaze to the ledger above, and you to the ledger within, where tonight will be entered with a mark that means accounted for, nothing lost. The sky performed its duties. The field answered. You lie back and the ground accepts your shape without surprise. A small pebble introduces itself to your shoulder and is forgiven. You count to 5 and stop, leaving one star uncounted for luck to live in, or for the aunt's warts to stay lazy, or simply because it pleases you to leave a door ajar. The watchman's staff makes one last shallow circle. The river remembers how to say hush in a dozen dialects and uses all of them at once. The night deepens by an eyelash. The cow sleeps in the grammar of ruminants, the kind without commas. Argus keeps watch, a cathedral of eyes under a roof of fire. When you finally close your own, you feel the numbers continue without you, precise and merciful, as if the stars had decided to count you too and found the sum agreeable. The cow lowers herself with a patience that belongs to large, careful bodies. First, the forelegs fold, then the hindquarters sink, and at the last, the whole weight meets the ground with a softness that surprises you every time. She chooses a patch where the grass has already learned the idea of being a bed. The sound is part sigh, part cloth being laid on a table. Her breath evens. Her flanks begin that quiet rise and fall a sleeper wears when sleep is serious. Night has settled enough to make edges kind. The river is a darker ribbon, with a few coins of light laid upon it by the first brave stars. The laurel keeps its smell but lowers its voice. From the hills, a dog speaks once and then thinks better of being in charge. Somewhere beyond the willow, a frog tries out one syllable and decides repetition will improve it. The watchman plants his staff a palm's width deeper, as if to remind the earth that he belongs to it for the duration. You sit near the cow's shoulder, close enough to feel the warmth that gathers and pools around a sleeping creature. There is a sound, not quite a snore, not quite a sigh, that means her work of the day isn't finished. Inside, the old labor continues with the calm turning and turning that pasture asks of anyone who accepts its gifts. Now and then, she lifts her jaw a fraction, mouth moving in small, thoughtful circles, as though remembering a particularly good patch of clover and deciding to honor it one more time. People have been bedding cattle for nights like this longer than ink has been patient. In low houses where animals shared heat with sleepers, floors were strewn with straw or cut reed. In fields, beasts were ringed close under the eye of a boy, a dog, or a man who understood that fire and nearness make good fences in the dark. Old writings speak of watchfires on grazing land, of nightfolds near springs, of simple hurdles leaned into rough circles to keep hooves where they're wanted. Clay lamps smoke in those lines. Wooden pails wait for morning. Names are spoken softly so they stay. Mainstream historical fact. You picture a ring of embers out beyond the river bend and a hand turning a stick, purely for the comfort of seeing a circle become another circle. The cow's ear flicks once at a tickle only she can feel. Her eyelid lifts and sets again. You lay your palm on her shoulder and feel the slow tide of breath moving under hide and hair. The warmth that rises meets the night's cool and makes a small border country on your skin. Your own breathing follows hers, not because you choose it, but because the body likes teaching itself easy lessons. A small countryside notion wanders out of memory and lies down beside you. An old dairyman swore that if a cow falls asleep with her head pointing toward a river, the next day will pass without quarrel. If she points uphill, expect visitors. If she points at the open plain, look to your latch and your stores. He insisted that beasts read weather with their bones better than men read words, and he kept a tiny reed tucked in his cap to note the direction before dawn. For the ledger, he said, tapping his temple, quirky or fringe tidbit. You glance at her head, align gently toward the water, and decide to allow the promise of a quiet tomorrow. The watchman adjusts his weight. Several of his eyes keep the sky, but two consent to supervise the meadow's sleeping heart. You think how much of guarding is simply not leaving. The river approves this thought by continuing. Beyond the willow, the bell you heard in daylight is silent, yet you can almost hear the shape of its silence, round, expectant, ready to ring if asked. A bat cuts a corner of the night and writes no letter there, which seems courteous. The olive tree eases a branch and makes a sound like an old door, remembering the rooms it has opened. You consider the questions that scholars love to hold up to lamplight. When beasts lay under the same roof as people, was it purely thrift and heat, or was there company in the closeness? Were names a profit-saving tool, one more way to count, or were they the oldest spell against loneliness? In stones and ink, some households speak affection. Others speak only numbers and yields. The truth, like most beddings, was likely layered. Warmth, work, watchfulness, and the plain fondness that grows between creatures who hear one another breathe. Scholarly uncertainty. You do not try to solve it. You are busy hearing breathing. The cow's jaw stills. Her mouth closes. A long exhale leaves her, heavy but satisfied, like grain poured from a measure that was exact. For a while, nothing moves except the small muscles that dream beneath closed skin. You listen and learn the intervals. A deeper breath every seventh. A flutter that means a fly considered and gave up. A twitch along the flank that remembers a slope no longer underfoot. You pull your cloak, or the idea of one over your knees. The ground is cooled just enough to invite notice. The dust's earlier gold has become the color of well-used parchment. The laurel's dropped leaves lie like dull coins paid to the dark. Somewhere in your head a quiet inventory is kept. Rope, bowl, time, shrine, horn, olive, bell, prints on damp earth, eyes that count, breath that warms. Nothing is lost. Everything is where the day put it. The river slips a brighter shard of star from one bend to the next. You follow it and do not arrive anywhere except here, which is the best kind of journey to be making at this hour. The watchman allows a pair of eyes to rest, then trades the favor among the others like men passing a cup in winter. The night has plenty of eyes. It will not miss two. A thought knocks gently. Somewhere far, in a high room with cool stone, a queen may be sleeping too, her reasons folded away in a chest where she forgets to look. Her breath would not smell of clover. It would smell of myrtle and a little of polished metal. The cow's breath smells of clover and of not being a queen, which is a different sort of power. You place a hand on the warm ridge where a shoulder becomes neck and feel. Not mercy exactly, but agreement. You remember another small practice, traded like a secret between neighbors. On the first night, a calf sleeps in its own stall. Someone sits beside it until the second watch and hums not a song with words, just the kind of tune a mouth makes when it's pleased to teach the dark to be kind to new sleepers. They say it keeps fear from learning anyone's name too quickly. Whether it works or not, many calves have grown into cows who breathe this same slow grammar. Another fringe kindness, credible because it makes people gentle. The frog finds a better note. The cricket chooses a different forever and begins. Out over the meadow, dew thickens until each blade of grass holds a single round world on its tip. When the cow exhales, the dew nearest her shivers as if applauding without sound. You resist the tidy habit of closing your eyes immediately. You keep them open a little longer so the night can see that you saw it. The sky above the laurel is salt scattered from a careful hand. The river answers with the few grains it can borrow. The cow sleeps in the shape that would be called humility if it were a prayer, and contentment if it were a poem. You decide it is both and neither, and all right. When your eyelids finally lower, they do so in the manner of the cows, deliberate, without suspicion. The last thing you notice is the warmth radiating from her into the cool, a small hearth you did not build and do not have to tend. The last thing you hear is the watchman shifting his staff the width of a barley grain. The last thing you think is not a thought, only a soft acknowledgement that the field is keeping you, and the river is agreeing, and the night has counted you both and found you sufficient. The moon takes its time climbing into the sky, as if testing each rung before trusting the next. When it clears the hills, its light lies across the meadow in a strip just wide enough to include you, the cow, and the watchman. The grass in that strip turns the color of old tin. The rest of the field stays folded in a deeper shade. The river's surface collects the moon in small torn pieces, never holding it whole but always keeping enough to recognize. You shift so the light catches the side of your face. The cow's hide, in moonlight, loses its warm gold and becomes something quieter, a pale shape that drinks more than it reflects. Her breath makes brief clouds that wander only an inch before they dissolve. Argus tips his head up, and the eyes most suited to night work take over, their pupils widening until they almost touch their edges. Moonlight has been a clock longer than many clocks. Farmers once cut hay by it, the scythe flashing pale in the half-light. Shepherds timed the moving of flocks to higher pastures for nights when the way would be lit without lamps. Travelers used it to shave a day off their journeys without having to beg a bed along the road. In some coastal towns, tides were read alongside moonrise to decide when to drag boats higher up the beach before sleep. Mainstream historical fact. The moon, indifferent to these plans, simply continued its own route, being useful by accident. The willow by the bank is two trees now, the darker one that owns the day, and the lighter ghost that belongs to the moon. Between its roots, something stirs a small animal, bold enough under this soft lantern to rummage among last year's leaves. The sound is faint, like cloth being folded. The cow doesn't notice. She dreams on, her flank rising and falling in rhythm with the river's quieter breaths. A memory, half comic and half devout, drifts in. A neighbor used to claim that sleeping under moonlight too long would turn your thoughts silver, good for poets, dangerous for men with debts, and outright ruinous for young women not yet promised. He recommended covering your head with a cloth if you had to sleep outdoors, so the moon won't write in you without asking. Another old voice countered, leave your head uncovered, and you'd wake knowing the answer to at least one question that had troubled you at sunset. Quirky, or fringe tidbit. You do nothing either way, willing to let the moon scribble or not, as it pleases. Argus shifts again, staff moving with the smallest scrape. The moon paints his many eyes in layers, those looking skyward, bright as polished bone, those watching the ground deep as well water. He turns once, slowly, so each eye can take its measure of the meadow. Nothing is amiss, which is what watchmen like to find. Scholars still argue whether certain ancient festivals aligned themselves with full moons for convenience of light, or whether the phases had meanings that outweighed practical concerns. Some inscriptions seem to suggest gatherings and rites tied exactly to the brightest nights. Others hint the light was merely a servant to older, more complex calendars. Without the missing lines, It's hard to tell which came first, the ease of moving in moonlight or the symbolism pinned to its glow. Scholarly uncertainty. You think of this and then decide it's enough to have a clear path to the willow without tripping. The moon's strip of light moves, almost unnoticeably, nudging its way across the cow's shoulder. She stirs once, adjusts her jaw, and goes still again. The watchman's shadow lengthens, bends at the staff, and climbs part way up the laurel's trunk before sliding off into the grass. A fish breaks the river's surface with the smallest sound, leaving behind a ring that briefly holds the moon's reflection before it breaks into more rings. You follow them until they vanish against the darker current, somewhere far off, maybe in another field. Another bell tries a cautious note. The sound drifts towards you like a visitor who isn't sure they've chosen the right house. It fades before reaching the bank, leaving only the night's steady, cool breathing. The moon continues its slow climb, indifferent to who watches or sleeps. You settle your weight into the grass, feeling the cool along your back and the warmth still holding in the earth beneath your knees. The cow exhales once more, the breath barely visible, and you think, without deciding to that, this is the hour when the world could stop moving entirely, and no one here would mind. The ground holds the night's cool in its top layer, but just beneath, there is still a hint of the day's warmth. Like a memory the earth hasn't quite decided to keep or let go. You shift your palm against it, feeling the faint gradient from cool to warm, and imagine the seasons as a long version of this heat, slowly sinking, cold, slowly climbing, meeting somewhere in the middle before trading places again. The cow lies still, her breathing slow enough that you begin to time your own with it. Each rise of her flank is steady, each fall unhurried, and the pauses in between seem longer than you'd expect, though they never stray into worry. A soft gurgle comes from somewhere deep inside her, the kind that means work is still being done, quietly, without needing to stand. The watchman tilts his head. Some eyes remain fixed on the sky, but a few turn toward the darker edges of the meadow, where shadows shift in ways that might be wind or might be something else. His staff stays planted, not as a threat, but as a quiet anchor. You notice that he doesn't fidget. Every movement has its reason, and when there is no reason, there is no movement. In many old pastures, night meant a change of guard. Shepherds who had been awake since before sunrise would hand their charges over to younger men or trusted family members for the dark hours. Torches or small fires would mark the perimeter, not to keep the beasts in so much as to keep other things out. Some ancient accounts mention dogs sleeping light near their master's feet, lifting their heads at the smallest shift in air. Others tell of bells fastened not to gates but to favored animals, whose wandering would signal that the rest had followed. Mainstream historical fact. Here, no bell sounds. The cow has not moved, and the night's only rhythm comes from the layered breathing, yours, hers, and the watchman's, each keeping its own tempo but never clashing. A faint story from your childhood slips in, uninvited but not unwelcome. It claimed that if you slept beside a cow on the night of the first full moon after midsummer, you'd dream whatever the cow was dreaming, and wake with the knowledge of which herbs to gather for the coming year. Some swore it worked, others swore it was nonsense invented to excuse sleeping in the pasture instead of the house. The teller of the story never said whether the dreams were clear or confusing, only that they felt like they belonged to someone older, quirky or fringe tidbit. You wonder briefly what this cow might be dreaming, but decide not to guess. The river shifts its tone, a little lower now, as though the cool has thickened its flow. Somewhere upstream, perhaps, a small branch has fallen in, changing the current just enough to give the water a new voice. The willow leans into it, letting some of its finer leaves drift loose to be carried away. Scholars still argue over whether cattle in antiquity were ever truly left unattended at night in open pasture, or whether accounts of such freedom are more poetic than factual. Some say that in regions with fewer predators, night grazing was common. Others counter that the value of the animals would have kept them close to human watch at all times. The truth likely bent with terrain, season, and the temperament of the herder. Scholarly uncertainty. The watchman turns slightly, scanning the meadow in a slow arc, then returns to stillness. His presence feels less like vigilance now, and more like a part of the meadow's own arrangement, as if the field would look unfinished without him standing there. The cow exhales, her breath warmer now against the cooling air. and a small curl of it drifts toward you. You close your eyes and breathe it in. Not for meaning, not for omen, simply because it's there. The grass presses faintly against your side. The earth's warmth meets your skin. The night leans in and stays. The river has begun speaking in a slower voice, as if it too is settling in for the long part of the night. Its earlier chatter water over stone, reed against reed, has smoothed into longer syllables. You lie still, letting those syllables stretch across your thoughts until there's hardly any difference between hearing and thinking. The cow hasn't moved much, but her ear twitches now and then at some sound too faint for you to notice. Her flank rises and falls in the same untroubled measure, and her jaw works in tiny, slow circles, as though she's still considering something she chewed hours ago. The warmth from her body makes a small pocket in the air, so that when a breeze passes, you feel the contrast cool on your cheek, warm along your side. Argus stands in the same place, though the tilt of his head has changed just enough to follow the moon's shift. Some of his eyes keep their attention on the meadow. Others have turned upward, where clouds are gathering thin, silver-edged veils that move across the stars without hiding them entirely. His staff rests steady in the earth, casting a shadow that has shortened and lengthened in quiet conversation with the moonlight. In old riverside settlements, nights like this were often used for repair nets, mended by the glow of small fires, baskets rewoven, leather softened and re-oiled. The quiet work could be done sitting, with hands knowing their tasks so well that the dark was no obstacle. In some places, animals were brought close during these hours, not because they needed tending, but because their nearness made the air feel safer. Mainstream historical fact. You picture a semicircle of such fires, each with its own shape of flame, and the murmur of voices never rising above the rhythm of water. A countryside belief floats to mind. If you could catch the reflection of the moon in a bucket of river water before the surface stilled, you could keep it for luck. People would set the bucket near the doorway, so anyone who entered would step over the moon without disturbing it, ensuring good fortune stayed inside the house. Others swore the practice only worked if the bucket was made of wood that had been part of a boat, quirky or fringe tidbit. You imagine the moon in a bucket now, rippling at every breath of wind. The clouds thin again, letting more starlight through. The Pleiades drift higher, and you follow them until your gaze meets the edge of the willow's leaves. The sound of those leaves in the breeze is softer now, as though they've decided to stop offering commentary and simply listen. Scholars still argue over whether certain rivers mentioned in ancient texts were literal, navigable waterways or poetic stand-ins for the passage of time. A few argue that both interpretations could have been true at once, that a river could be a real place with boats and fish, and at the same time a metaphor for years slipping past. Scholarly uncertainty. You decide it doesn't matter which the river here might be. It flows. It's enough. The cow stirs once, adjusting her legs under her body, then settles again. The sound she makes is low and almost musical, a kind of note that doesn't need to be followed by another. You breathe in time with it until your own breath feels like part of hers, and part of the river, and part of whatever the watchman hears in all this. The leaf lets go the way a decision finally does, without a sound you can name. It has been loosening all evening, working at the thin hinge where stem meets twig, until moonlight and a small opinionated breeze agree to finish the job. It tilts, tips, and then steps off into air. For a breath it is a boat, for the next a small green sickle turning slow harvests in the dark. When it touches the river, the surface accepts it, with the courtesy water keeps for laurel. No splash, only a new idea traveling outward in circles. You crouch at the bank to watch. The leaf floats spine first, then rolls, then rights itself, learning river grammar on the way. The midrib points downstream, then upstream, as if unsure which way a story should be read, left to right to left, or in the old way, back and forth like a plow cutting its careful lines. The moon writes a thin bar of brightness along the wet edge. The bar breaks and joins and breaks again as the leaf crosses tiny seams between slow and slower currents. The cow steps close behind you, her hoof finding the damp margin and making a small, precise print beside your own. Her breath lands on your nape, warm enough to remind the night it isn't finished being day in a few important places. She looks past your shoulder at the drifting leaf, with the kind of attention animals lend to things that resemble food and yet are not food, which is to say, respectful but brief. A faint ring of ripples moves out from the leaf and reaches a stand of reeds. Each slender stalk nods once as the circle arrives, then forgets it was ever troubled. The watchman has shifted to the river's rim as well, not close enough to crowd the moment, but near enough that a pair of his eyes can learn the leaf as if it were a small citizen whose name should be remembered. His staff makes a new shallow circle in wet sand. He does not look at that circle again. It will keep its own edges for a little while, and then contribute itself to general smoothness. People have been making meaning out of laurel leaves on water for longer than it takes a river to reach its sea. In oracles and festivals, the famous one at Delphi comes easily to mind. Laurel leaves were chewed or burned, carried in garlands or shaken in the hand so their nervous little tongues could speak the wind's intention. Laurel crowned victors, favored poets, and statues of gods. In more ordinary houses, sprigs hung over lintels on certain days, or were tossed into hearths to make the air smell busy and bright. Mainstream historical fact. The leaf here has no audience but 3 creatures and a moon, but its authority is intact. The current takes it sideways, then grants it a forward sentence again. You notice how the river's skin isn't one motion, but a cabinet of motions, small drawers opening and closing, each keeping its own collection of glints. The leaf, to its credit, does not insist on being the only subject. It agrees to be one more bright thing among many. A fringe custom you once heard from a woman who sold herbs under a canvas awning wanders back into the present. She swore that if you write a question on a laurel leaf with the tip of a pin and set it floating at dusk, the way it spins will answer you. A steady downstream drift meant go. A turn and return near the shore meant wait. A stubborn crossing to the far bank meant ask someone older. She added that questions about love made leaves tack like nervous boats, and so were poor candidates for this method. Laurel can bear news, she said, but not impatience. Quirky or fringe tidbit. You do not test the custom. You simply watch how the leaf, which was not written on, localizes the moon every few seconds, and then forgets again. The willow decides to participate and lowers a thread of root into the slowest part of the eddy, a pale line wavering like the world's thinnest fish. The leaf approaches, hesitates, circles once, and slips past. It is a polite meeting that leaves both parties certain of their own tasks. A water boatman rows by underneath, the inverted star of its wake briefly sketching a small constellation for anyone who likes their astronomy close to the surface. Scholars still argue about which water exactly belonged to which story when the old poets talked about riverbanks and holy leaves. Was it this sort of low, slow river that hosted the quieter rituals? Or were they imagining stiffer streams with faster talk? Or even channels cut by hand near temples where water could be instructed to behave? The texts point in several directions, and the ground, asked for proof, offers only stains, post holes, and a few stone basins that refuse to say whether they once tasted laurel smoke or only laundry. Scholarly uncertainty. The uncertainty suits the leaf, which seems pleased to belong wherever it currently is. A bat skims so near the water that the leaf's shadow wobbles. The cow shifts her weight. Her hoof sinks a finger's breadth deeper into the bank, with a sound like a page being turned. From the olive tree, a single narrow leaf detaches and considers joining the laurel. It changes its mind, caught on a coil of grass. The watchman, perhaps satisfied with the leaf's conduct, lets one pair of eyes close. The others continue their separate audits. Stars, reeds, the reliable breathing of the field's largest sleeper. You ease down until your forearm rests on the mud, cool, pressing through your sleeve. The river licks the edge of fabric and leaves a dark gloss there. The leaf drifts near enough that you could touch it with one careful finger. You don't. Touch would settle a question the river is answering perfectly without you. Instead, you match your breathing to the pace at which it moves. A slow slide, a tiny turn, a reconsidered straightness. Somewhere a fish exhales its opinion of the moon. Rings riffle the tiny craft and pass on. For a moment, the leaf parks itself in a pocket of resistance, then weasels free, settling in behind a small leader of foam the way a bird might take another's slipstream. You think of small advantages and how the humble things of a place use them without congratulating themselves. In your ear lives an old, durable proverb, probably given to you by the same aunt who disliked counting stars aloud, that a laurel leaf on water will keep a secret until the first bird sings. What secret? Any that belongs to someone who could not carry it to morning without help. Give it to the leaf, she would say, and the river will take the weight to a place that has room for it. You never tested that either, not because you doubted the river's capacity, but because secrets handled so kindly stop needing to be told. The current draws the leaf into a slow bend where the bank curves like a shoulder. A miniature beach has built itself there, out of patience and grit. The leaf grounds very gently, its tip making first contact like a soft vowel. It rests. For a while the river thinks about reclaiming it, then decides to try later. A reed leans, salutes the newcomer, and resumes its column of listening. You stand again and wipe your forearm with the dry part of your sleeve. The cow noses your shoulder, as if to say that watching a leaf is noble work, but the meadow offers larger projects in the morning. The watchman's staff makes a last small circle in the damp sand. The mark gleams, then dulls as the skin of water collapses into it. If someone asked you what happened here, you could say, a leaf fell. The river practiced hospitality. The bank practiced keeping. You could add, the moon volunteered for bookkeeping, and balance was preserved. Nothing was solved. Everything was briefly aligned. The leaf will either vanish downstream when the next rumor of current grows bold, or it will dry into the shape of a memory and crumble. Both fates are common. Both are correct. You step back from the lip and feel the ground firm again under your heels. The meadow exhales a breeze, or your imagination turning into weather. The cow moves a pace toward her chosen bed. The watchman's eyes, several of them, return to the sky's ledger. You give the river a nod for services rendered and let the night reclaim your attention. The leaf remains, a small green ship run aground at the end of a voyage exactly long enough. Morning begins without asking permission. A thin seam of brightness opens along the hills, and the meadow unbuttons itself stitch by stitch. The river remembers its day voice quieter than a shout, louder than a whisper, and resumes the conversation it never truly paused. The willow rinses itself in light. The laurel counts its leaves and finds the sum unchanged. You sit up, slow enough not to disturb the small agreements the night made with the ground. The cow rises in chapters. Forelegs, pause. Hindquarters, pause. Full height, certainty. Dew prints her ankles and makes small lamps of the grass she brushes. She shakes once, a mild thunder for the benefit of flies and memory. Her breath is cool at first, then warms as the sun suggests it should. You scratch the ridge between jaw and throat where the rope once lay, and she leans into the touch as if concluding a conversation that began yesterday and plans to continue tomorrow. The watchman stands where he stood, which is also where he stands now and where he will stand later. His staff has drawn a family of pale circles in the damp earth, each one an hour with the edges left soft. Several of his eyes drowse, several attend, several keep the sky from being lonely. He inclines his head in the kind of greeting that applies equally to dawn and to neighbors. On mornings like this in old valleys, people return to their ordinary genius, sweeping thresholds, lifting pots to the cool side of the courtyard, shaking out cloth, coaxing embers back to flame with breath that knows how to ask. Herds were counted, kids untangled, lambs presented with the day as if it were new bread. Roads unrolled their dust and invited feet. Markets rehearsed the voices they would need by noon. The river, being a road that makes itself, carried nets, gossip, oil-scented timber, and sometimes simple joy. Mainstream historical fact. The meadow does not need those lists, but it is pleased that you remember how to make them. A small, improbable memory surfaces from the talk of herdsmen and a boy with goats. Someone once told you that if you rub your eyelids with the first dew collected on time, you will see the day in its correct order without getting ahead of yourself. You tried it once and discovered that time dew mostly makes the eyes sting. Even so, you think kindly of the custom. Getting ahead of yourself is the most tempting mistake. Quirky or fringe tidbit. You settle for rinsing your hands in the river, which is a more durable remedy for almost everything. Scholars still argue which part of the tale belongs to which mouth. Was the nymph a river in a dress? The queen a field with a diadem? The cow a reminder that old gods have barns as well as temples? Did later poets tidy a rural spirit into court manners, mislaying motives as easily as wreaths? Fragments of pottery, scratched letters on stone, and lines copied by hands that loved neatness more than accuracy disagree with one another like cousins at a feast. Scholarly uncertainty. The morning allows all of them to be probably, which is kinder than certainly most days. You stand and stretch, which is to say you offer the day a shape and ask if it finds it acceptable. The day does. You gather what has been given, the rope's patience, the shrine's cool, time's lifted breath, milk's plain honesty, horn's quiet shine, olive shade, bell note, footprints that went uphill and forgot themselves, leaf that sailed and parked, stars that counted you back. None of it needs a verdict. All of it adds up to the sort of some watchmen admire. Nothing missing. The cow nudges your shoulder and then chooses clover. That is her decision about the future. The watchman taps the ground with the staff and leaves a round consent. You look toward the hills and see a small human figure on the far path with two goats who mean well. A day has arrived. It will want cleaning, feeding, mending, and forgiving. It will want exactly as much as yesterday and give back either a little more or a little less. Your job is to meet the trade with good manners. You trail your hand along the willow's lowest branch as you pass, and the leaves rub your knuckles like friendly cats. The river keeps a copy of your reflection on file for 2 breaths, and then releases it to make room for someone else's. The laurel refuses to let you leave without smelling like decisions, so you crush one leaf and accept its dignified sting on your fingertips. If a queen with measured eyes remembers anything at this hour, let it be the meadow's competence, grass that knows its business, cords that hold without boasting, altars that accept time as legal tender, watchmen who keep time accurate by noticing, cows who turn the world's errors into breakfast. If a nymph remembers anything, let it be water's preference for continuance over verdict. If you remember anything, let it be this: unfinished stories are not failures. They're fields left fallow so next season recognizes where to begin. The sun puts a pale coin on the river, and then another. The first insect of the day chooses your sleeve, is disappointed, finds a flower. The cow's jaw begins its work in the currency of circles. Argus, completing his long subtraction of stars, adds the meadow back to itself with a glance. You and the cow are still here. That is not nothing. That is the whole arithmetic some mornings. The story, asked for an ending, chooses to graze. You accept the choice. The river, pleased with how politely you have listened, says one more word. That means continue. And the day, which understands all dialects of that verb, proceeds. The field pulls a lid of quiet over the morning and lets you rest beneath it. You lie back where the grass has learned your shape and feel. The ground explain itself in slow, warm sentences. Here is weight held without complaint. Here is a root making a straight decision. Here is a stone that practices stillness, so you don't have to. The river breathes beside you, a long, even in and out, that asks for nothing and gives you pace. Close your eyes. The sounds become uncomplicated. A fly sketches a soft circle and erases it. A reed rubs its thin hands. The cow's jaw turns the meadow into calm. The watchman, a patient hinge between night and day, keeps the door to this hour almost closed so no hurry can slip through. Breathe in through your nose. Meadow, clay, a shy sweetness of crushed leaf. Breathe out through your mouth. Dust loosens. Thoughts fold and stack themselves without your help. The sun warms your eyelids just enough to color the dark behind them. If a name wants to come back, let it hover at a distance like a leaf deciding which current to trust. You don't need it. You have the shape of what it meant. Your shoulders soften. Your jaw forgets to clench. Your hands remember how to be hands without holding anything. The list of small chores for the day walks itself to the edge of the field and waits there politely. There will be time. For now, the field is responsible for you. It has accepted the role. If sleep arrives, it will do so on hooves you cannot hear. If it does not, you are still allowed to rest in the wide, slow company of water, leaf, rope, horn, and stone. You are counted. Nothing is missing. The meadow is keeping you until you are ready to keep yourself again. End of script. Sweet dreams.